777. Wu Shuangjiang was trapped in the overlapping mini-worlds. He could no longer see the figures of the four people. Instead, he retracted the Dharma form that could hold up the heavens and earth. He started to admire the first layer of the mustard world that was the foundation of the constellation map. Outside, there was the aura of the mountain-searching map, but Wu Shuangjiang was not in a hurry. He soared through the void, and with a casual step, he could cross a constellation in the small world. Around him, because he was the only one who was suppressed, a breath or a step would collide with the small world. Especially when Wu Shuangjiang walked, it was like a surging river crashing into a pillar in the water, stirring up waves of dazzling seven-colored glaze. The flowing light overflowed and was incomparably bright. Behind him, there seemed to be an extremely thin but condensed long line that did not disperse, making Wu Shuangjiang look like a god crossing the river of stars. He strolled leisurely like a qi cultivator who had just entered the secular world of Qintianjian. He had to do the 4 introductory courses of fainting vision, fainting meditation, morning meditation, and morning meditation. Then, Wu Shuangjiang took a step and hovered in the void between the 2 constellations. He looked back and saw long lines that seemed to be the trajectory of life. They did not dissipate for a long time. Was this the manifestation of a karmic line? Wu Shuangjiang felt that it was a little novel. He let it go and waited for the other party to pull the thread. He only hoped that it was not a trick that was all talk and no action. Wu Shuangjiang put his hands behind his back and lowered his head with a smile. Mr. Kui, they all say that the qi is like a bull. Where is the sword light? There were only 2 people that Wu Shuangjiang was interested in. They were Suzy and Xiu Hu. Wu Shuangjiang admired the former's poems from the bottom of his heart. That was why when he and Lu Chen stood outside the Da Xiandu temple, Wu Shuangjiang said that he admired Suzy even in front of the child in the tiger hat. As for the latter, he did not admire the deceit of his master or the 3 noble things. Instead, he admired Kui Dong's choice and the 100 years of preparation that led to that choice. Wu Shuangjiang felt that it was very interesting. If it were him, he would definitely not be able to do it. Since that was the case, he deserved his respect. Wu Shuangjiang rarely felt that he couldn't accomplish anything. He couldn't write as heroic a poem as Suzy. He could scheme against 2 worlds in just 100 years and play them in the palm of his hand. He couldn't compare to Kui Shi. Therefore, Wu Shuangjiang was really not being polite when he addressed him as Mr. Kui. In fact, Wu Shuangjiang no longer needed to be courteous to anyone, not to Sun Huizhong of the Xuanju Monastery or Lu Chen of the Beko Keikyang building. A white-robed young man who had returned to this place appeared extremely far below. Even with Wu Shuangjiang's level of cultivation, he could only see the silhouette of a mustard seed no matter how hard he tried. However, the young man's voice was loud. "Beg me, or you won't be able to see me." Wu Shuangjiang smiled. When Xiu Hu was young, he shouldn't be like this, right? He remembered that there was a time when he hid his identity and watched the debate between the 3 factions from afar. The young scholar standing behind the old Shotzi had a scholarly air about him. He had a steady temperament and even had a natural elegance about him. At that time, Wu Shuangjiang felt that this person was not ordinary. Sure enough, after that, White Emperor City's Rosy Clouds Bureau was formed. Wu Shuangjiang said to himself, "That's right. I'm a guest and the person I'm meeting is half Xiu Hu. I should give him a greeting gift." This person raised his palm casually and said the 2 words "raise the sword" with a smile. First, a snow-white light appeared beside him. Then, it stretched into a long line of sword light. Finally, it turned into a slightly chipped long sword. The style of the long sword, except for more than 200 extremely fine chipped edges, was exactly the same as the sword of Yu Do of the Beko Keikyang building, the Daoist scripture of the 4 immortal swords. Wu Shuangjiang said again, "Drop the sword." A line fell straight down. The magnificent sword light fell straight from the constellation of the bullfighting constellation to the mortal world from the heavens. The white-robed young man stood where he was. His sleeves puffed up and 12 sword lights appeared in his sleeves. He was returning the favor to the guest from the heavens. The 12 sword lights each drew a slight arc. They did not compete with the Daoist scripture of the Daoist scripture. At most, They would each cut their own way. Moreover, he might not be able to dodge the sword. The sword light from the heavens fell like a mountain. Kui Dongshan curled his lips. Damn it, I can't dodge it. Wu Shuangjiang is shameless. He's not a sword cultivator, but he dares to use a sword. One of Kui Dongshan's talisman incarnations was crushed on the spot. There was no suspense. The sword light was vast and mighty. However, it was limited by the strange rules of heaven and earth. It could not really penetrate the small world of the star atlas. Instead, it kept appearing abruptly among the various constellations. It folded again and again, suddenly disappeared and suddenly appeared again. A sword light kept shining between heaven and earth. Wu Shuangjiang did not even look at the 12 flying swords. After they came close, they stopped dozens of feet away from Wu Shuangjiang without exception. Wu Shuangjiang reached out and grabbed. The flying swords of different sizes were all condensed into the size of mustard seeds. He grasped all of them in the palm of his hand and instantly crushed them into powder. These virtual objects did not contain any real Daoist meaning. They were not qualified to be imitated by him. Wu Shuangjiang shook his sleeve. The imitated sword with boundless Daoist meaning disappeared into his sleeve. Kui Dongshan appeared at the 7 constellations of the south. The 7th constellation of the south was at the tail of the vermilion bird. However, he had changed into Wu Shuangjiang's appearance. Moreover, he used his finger to draw a talisman, writing in the Year Palace, Wu Shuangjiang on his palm. With a flip of his palm, a string of characters immediately melted like snow, merging into the chariot mansion beneath his feet. Afterwards, a colossal chariot earthworm appeared, swimming slowly. On top of the earthworm, a burly giant dressed in black and carrying a sword appeared. There were also 5 yellow-clothed women standing on a carriage. They each took out a character from in the Year Palace, Wu Shuangjiang. Wu Shuangjiang laughed involuntarily. This Mr. Kui really knew how to fuss over such petty benefits. He took advantage of everything. Did he want to use this to take advantage of the situation to go against people? Many little drops make an ocean. He could split the losses with the other 3. In the end, not only would none of them die in battle, he could even secure victory at a certain moment. That was a good plan. However, whether or not he could fulfill his wish would depend on his mood. These young people really dared to think of exchanging injuries for the life of a 14th realm cultivator. The 4 spirits of the heavens were in the 4 cardinal directions. The 4 palaces, 9 plains, 28 mansions, the sun, moon, and 5 stars were in the 4 cardinal directions. The great path was like a grinding ant. Apart from the small commotion at the chariot mansion, there was also a huge phenomenon. The heavens and earth closed. The 28 mansions each had a god general in charge. It was like a spectator opening up a star map on a table and rolling up the scroll once more. He wanted to use this to grind down some of Wu Shuangjiang's cultivation. Wu Shuangjiang only pointed at the constellation not far away and asked with a smile, "Most books record that it is a wall water serpent, but according to the ferryman, it is a wall water serpent. Which one is true?" Kui Dongshan turned into a god spirit that supported the heavens and earth. He lowered his head and bent his waist. His eyes were like the sun and moon. On his snow-white sleeves were numerous water descendants of the flood dragon species. They were all curled up like a dragon. Kui Dongshan's Dharma image looked down on Wu Shuangjiang. His normal casual tone was like thunder. It was like a thunder god was beating a drum. However, the content of his words was very similar to Kui Dongshan's. "You ask father? Who should father ask?" Wu Shuangjiang raised his head and said, "If Mr. Kui continues to cause trouble, I will be greatly disappointed in Xiu Hu." Kui Dongshan slammed his palm down. Wu Shuangjiang shook his head and shook his sleeves. He roughly understood the mysteries of the star map and felt that there was no need to stay here any longer. He went outside to take a look at the mountain search formation. Therefore, 4 swords appeared from his sleeves and circled around him. The 4 swords pointed in 4 different directions. Daoist scripture, Tai Bai, Wanfa, and naivety. Although they were 4 imitation swords, there was still a great disparity between the swords of Daoist Second Elder Yu Do, Sun Huizhong, Bai Yi, the great heavenly master of Longhu Mountain, and Ning Yao, the 4 true masters of the immortal swords. However, only Wu Shuangjiang could perform such a magnificent feat. Moreover, the sword qi that filled the heavens and earth could not be faked. It was like the world's inferior authentic immortal swords had gathered once more. It was a magnificent sight. Wu Shuangjiang only needed to casually point his finger to break Kui Dongshan's Dharma image. The 4 swords flashed and disappeared. The mustard seed world was smashed. The white-clothed youth did not even have the chance to retrieve the damaged formation map. Perhaps Kui Dongshan had never thought of retrieving it from the start. He came to the second mini-world. It was the typing edition of Jiang Shangzhen's mountain search formation map. It was different from the most widely circulated mountain search formation maps in the world. In this typing edition, the targets of the immortal generals searching the mountains were mostly human. Among them, there were many graceful women whose faces had turned pale. On the other hand, the immortal generals with golden rings on their hands looked very fierce and did not look human. When Wu Shuangjiang came to the mountain search formation, there were no more disputes or killing in the mini-world of the mountain search formation map. Regardless of friend or foe, they all left the mountain and swarmed out. They all used their mystiques and tens of thousands of spells crazily attacked Wu Shuangjiang. Wu Shuangjiang's mind moved slightly, and the 4 imitation swords instantly went far away. They hovered in the 4 corners of the world. Wherever the 4 swords pointed, sword light bloomed. It was as if 4 pillars were erected in the 4 corners of the world. Then, he took out 2 talisman and threw it lightly. A woman with a fox-white fur coat appeared beside him. She was full of heroic spirit. She was wearing a pair of flying cloud shoes. They were made of black silk and embroidered with clouds. They were dyed with perfume. Fragrant mist lingered around her feet. She walked leisurely like a fairy who had ascended to heaven with white clouds under her feet. As she walked, white clouds rolled and the world was filled with a strange fragrance. There was also a handsome young man with a yellow belt around his waist. A jade pouch hung from his waist. The young man only needed to reach out and press on his belt. Countless mountain spirits and monsters who were being searched retreated into the mountains. When the young man took out a jade pouch from his pouch and casually threw it into the air, all the immortal generals with golden rings on their wrists began to stop moving forward. In the end, they slowly retreated. Wu Shuangjiang looked left and right. Looking at the immortal couple beside him, he smiled faintly. On the other side of the talisman imitation sword, a white-clothed young man stood over 10 li away. He nodded and let out a sigh of relief. I have to remind Mistress not to use her sword so easily. A small spirit that had sneaked over furtively nodded. How troublesome. Compared to fighting with Pei Minute and Court Chief Wu, it's much more worrisome. The talisman imitation sword flashed and the white-clothed young man was cut in half at the waist. The small spirit was beheaded. In the end, the white-clothed young man's legs bounced and his body was severed. The small spirit waved his hand and placed the head back on his shoulder. Wu Shuangjiang was slightly surprised. It was not Kui Dongshan's method. The talisman was just to refresh the mind. It was a simple and insignificant trick. However, Jiang Shangzhen's yin spirit had truly left his body. How could he be unharmed? Wu Shuangjiang thought for a while and smiled. Stop hiding. Don't be idle. After he finished speaking, in the 3 small worlds. In the small world in the cage, Ning Yao saw Chen Pinggan, who was wearing a green robe and carrying a sword on his back. In a secluded place, Chen Pinggan, who was holding his breath and holding his sword on his knees, opened his eyes and saw Ning Yao. In front of Jiang Shangzhen, there was a weak girl who looked like Heng Wu. However, there was no one beside Kui Dongshan's real body. Wu Shuangjiang laughed and said, "Good Xiu Hu. You really don't disappoint." In the inn. The white-haired boy's face was pale as he stood on the bench in a daze. He thought that after Ning Yao reached the Ascendant Realm, he would hide in the 5th world with Ning Yao for at least 70 to 80 years. Even if the next time the door opened, he could go to several worlds. Even if the traveling cultivators were no longer restricted by the realm, he could ask Ning Yao or Chen Pinggan to hide in the Confucian Temple in the Middle Earth for a few years. He could avoid Wu Shuangjiang no matter what. Firstly, he didn't expect Ning Yarrow to bring him to the vast world. Secondly, he didn't expect Wu Shuangjiang to have reached the 14th realm. Thirdly, he didn't expect that he would really cross a world. He had been waiting for him on this ferry for a long time. It was ridiculous. In the world, there were only cultivators who were afraid of inner demons. How could inner demons be afraid of qi cultivators? The only exception was Wu Shuangjiang, who was an exception. First, he deliberately created an inner demon for her at the bottleneck of the nascent soul realm. After Wu Shuangjiang smoothly reached the pure jade realm, he refined the inner demon that he imprisoned in his heart bit by bit with secret techniques for 1,000 years. Finally, Wu Shuangjiang used it as an opportunity to reach the 14th realm. Wu Shuangjiang was infatuated, but he was even more ruthless. Under the Qingming heaven, Wu Shuangjiang's stubbornness was almost as famous as his Dao techniques. That was why it tried so hard to find an opportunity to leave the prison of its heart. In the end, it followed the Daoist from the Da Shendu temple and traveled to the vast world's north continent. After that, it obtained its freedom according to a certain agreement. It wandered around and finally found a place to stay, which was the prison that Old Def was in charge of at the Great Wall of Sword Qi. It looked like a prison, but to it, it was an extremely precious place of freedom. At least it didn't have to worry about its life. Moreover, compared to the life that was worse than death in Wu Shuangjiang's hands, it could scold Old Def in the prison. When it was bored, it could take the initiative to take a few swords from the torture officers. It could chat with the little girl and occasionally have some fun with Xiao Chuo. When it teased the demon cultivators who were in a more miserable situation than it was, it didn't feel that it was so miserable. This was especially so when they could follow the gaps in the demon's state of mind, as if they were traveling and enjoying the scenery. With their vision, they could see the great rivers and mountains of the desolate wasteland, and casually read through countless interesting stories. It was even more of a joy. Don't be afraid. Pei Qian took a sip of the glutinous rice wine and touched Xiaomi's head. He said softly, "It's okay if you're really afraid. Drink until you're drunk and fall asleep. When you wake up, you can see master and mistress." Zhu Mili raised her hands and wiped her face. She nodded vigorously and held the white bowl with both hands. It was a pity that the bowl was too small. A pot of wine seemed to be too much. It took a lot of effort to finish the entire pot of glutinous rice wine. If you can't help, don't add to the trouble. This was the first principle of Zhu Mili's journey in the martial world. Pei Qian handed over his pot of wine and Xiaomi continued to drink bowl by bowl. The white-haired boy saw this scene and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. He sat on the long bench and was about to say something about Wu Shuangjiang's power. Pei Qian immediately cast a glance at him. The white-haired boy understood instantly. He was already feeling guilty, so he stubbornly shut his mouth and didn't say anything. The little girl in black burped, lay on the table, and fell asleep. Only then did the white-haired boy sigh. "I know Ning Yarrow and Chen Pingan's backgrounds. They are very powerful, but against that person, they don't have any chance of winning. I'm not trying to scare you, but they really don't have any chance of winning. That's why Chen Pingan didn't hand me over. Your master is really too stupid." It reached out and grabbed a pot of Osmanthus wine. It raised its head and drank a mouthful of wine. It wiped its mouth and sighed. It slowly said, "I'm that young man's inner demon. My realm is not bad. I'm in the ascendant state. Anyway, you can see that. But this inner demon of mine is very down and out. I'm not a Confucian sage. Otherwise, I would have refined 8 characters. My luck is bad, and my life is full of difficulties. I've lost face for thousands of inner demons. Alas, it's all ancestral patriarch Yingguan's fault for naming his mountain too casually. If it were Mount Joy, I would have bullied that person. When it came to sad matters, it could only drink. It never dared to call Wu Shuangjiang's name directly. It was not just a taboo, but more a kind of fear from the bottom of its heart. It could be seen that this otherworldly demon was really afraid of the palace master. Pei Qian immediately understood. Since it was that person's inner demon, that person had come to collect debts. Regarding the palace master, Yu Zhuanfu had mentioned it after the battle in the Jinjia continent. Pei Qian only listened to it as a story, as if he was listening to a book. It was just that he never thought that the palace master would come out of the book and fight with his master to the death. It was just that that person had already been stripped of his inner demon. Logically speaking, it was like cutting off 3 corpses. For a chi cultivator, wasn't it a wonderful thing? Why did he have to take back his inner demon? Pei Qian stared at this otherworldly demon. Little girl, do you think I will be the winner of your master's side? Aren't you too naive? Didn't your master tell you that reason and absolutes are a pair of life and death enemies? Between the two, the most afraid is each other. It pointed at itself and smiled bitterly. To be honest, it's up to you whether to believe it or not. That person's ability, when I escaped from the palace master, I only knew about 70 to 80%. Moreover, it was just some minor details. His special skills, especially his trump card, had already been refined by him. What's more, except for the otherworldly demon which was like a fish in water, after leaving the heart of the cultivators, its Dao skills would inevitably be greatly reduced. It's easy for me to bully a low-level cultivator, such as a Jade Raw Realm cultivator, to stir up trouble. I can easily kill him. But if it's an immortal with a strong Dao heart, it's a little troublesome. As for an Ascendant Realm cultivator, for example, do you think that if the Fire Dragon Immortal opened his heart and opened the door to welcome guests, would I dare to go? Of course not. That's why Chen Pinggan did not involve me in this fight. It's a wise move. It did not mention that when it was in Chen Pinggan's state of mind, it had already suffered. It was forcefully pulled by a certain Chen Pinggan to chat, which was equivalent to listening to the truth for a few years. It looked at the little girl in black who was sleeping soundly, then looked at Pei Qian. It forced a smile, finished a pot of Osmanthus wine, and took the remaining pot from the table. But I have to thank you 2 little girls. Even if this storm was caused by me, you only have some natural resentment towards me, but you don't have any hatred, which is surprising. Chen Pinggan's family has a good reputation. Pei Qian could see through people's hearts. As an Ascendant Realm otherworldly demon, it could also see through people's hearts. It asked, "Do you know why I'm willing to follow Chen Pinggan?" Pei Qian nodded. "My master will definitely do what he promised." It nodded, then shook its head. "You're only half right." The other half was that in its opinion, the young hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Aura was too similar to a person. It was both worried and reassured. The young hidden official was very similar to Wu Shuangjiang, very similar, too similar. In many choices, Chen Pinggan was simply a young Wu Shuangjiang. Imitating the little rice grain lying on the table, the white-haired boy raised his hands. His 5 fingers were like hooks, like 2 combs, scratching his head again and again. He stroked his hair and said to himself, "I can't hide, and I can't escape. What should I do?" Pei Qian said, "It seems that when you can't do anything, you can only wait and see." "That's right." It smiled, raised its head, and asked, "When you passed by the inverted mountain, did you stay in the stalk-in like your master?" Pei Qian nodded. It glanced at Pei Qian's eyes and was a little confused. "You little girl, didn't you see anything strange?" Pei Qian shook her head. "Before I went to the inn, little senior brother reminded me not to stare at anyone too much." It lay on the table again, spread its hands, and wiped the table gently. It said in a weak voice, "That young-looking innkeeper is actually the guardian of the Year Palace. I only know that his surname is Bai, but he doesn't have a name. Anyway, I call him Little Bai. He fights fiercely. Don't be fooled by his smiling face. When he was angry, his temper was worse than the sky. When I was in my hometown, he once twisted off the head of another sect's immortal realm ancestor and threw it to the heavens beyond heaven. No one could persuade him to do anything. The group of people who followed him were all not simple. They all came for me, so that they could capture me and take me back to claim credit. I guess before the Great Wall of Sword Aura and the Inverted Mountain ascended together, Little Bai must have looked for Chen Pinggan, but they didn't come to an agreement. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to go to the vast world personally. The young innkeeper of the Stork Inn, which had been operating on the Inverted Mountain for 200 to 300 years, was the guardian of the Year Palace. His real name was unknown, but his Daoist name was like a nickname. It was very perfunctory, and was called Little Bai. The other 4 people were all out of yin spirit and had traveled far away. However, they followed the inverted mountain and returned to their hometown sects. Dragon Zhong Yuanbo in the cave and Jun Yucho on the mountain were all immortals. The young girl who changed her name to Nyan Tsuehua and the woman in the inn called Nyan Chuantiao were both UPU. Before Wu Shuangjiang's rise, the Year Palace of the Qingming world was only a second-rate immortal sect. Not to mention the Dashuandu Temple, even a first-rate Daoist sect like the Immortal Staff Mountain could destroy the Year Palace in an instant. Therefore, Wu Shuangjiang single-handedly turned the Year Palace into a top-notch Daoist sect that was on par with the Dashuandu Temple. During this period of time, there were countless grudges and dangerous situations. No matter what, they were all killed by Wu Shuangjiang in the end. Moreover, Wu Shuangjiang's teaching of Taoism was unparalleled in the world. Within the Year Palace, all the cultivators in the upper 5 realms were the result of his personal teaching. Zhong Yuanbo's dragon-raising technique, Yucho's mountain refining technique, Yucho's Daoist partner Linghu Tsuelian's swordsmanship, and Wu Kai's Daoist name Deng Zhu's first wife Wu Kai her heavenly drum, burning lanterns to illuminate the void, and beating the drum to expel the plague ghosts were the secrets of the Year Palace's ancestral hall. Not only these ancestral masters of the Year Palace who had high seniority and high realms, Wu Shuangjiang was willing to personally teach Taoism to all the direct disciples and secondary disciples. He was extremely patient and attended to everything personally. It was no wonder that the entire Sui Chu Palace, from top to bottom, worshipped Wu Shuangjiang as a god from the bottom of their hearts. In the Qingming world, only Sun Huizhong's Shendu Temple and Wu Shuangjiang's Year Palace dared to disapprove of the Beko Keikyang building from the bottom of their hearts and actions. One was to go down the mountain to gain experience. If one tricked a Beko Keikyang building Daoist, they would set off firecrackers to celebrate when they returned to their own Daoist temple. Another was to have a conflict with a Beko Keikyang building Daoist on the way to gain experience. If one party didn't fight to the death, or if one party broke the longevity bridge, it wouldn't be considered a duel. In any case, everyone in the Year Palace had a longevity lantern. Zhong Yuanbo, the dragon in the cave, had died once. Jun Yucho's Daoist partner on the mountain had even died twice. Logically speaking, it was extremely difficult for them to enter the upper 5 realms. However, with Wu Shuangjiang around, it wasn't a problem. After they started cultivating, they had to start all over again. The Year Palace gave them countless heavenly treasures, and with Wu Shuangjiang's personal supervision and guidance, they were still unstoppable on the path of cultivation. The immortal sword sect of the Da Shendu Temple was known to be the most united in fighting in the world. The cultivators of the Year Palace were known to be the most heavy-handed and ruthless because they didn't cherish their lives the most. The scoundrels in the marketplace, especially the hot-headed youths, liked to act on impulse and didn't know how to control their strength. As long as they were given a knife, they didn't need to rely on alcohol to boost their courage. If they were displeased, they would take the knife and chop to death without caring about the consequences. Therefore, the Year Palace had a saying on the mountain, the youth's nest. After drinking the 2 pots of Osmanthus wine from Chen Pingan and Ning Yao, it began to eat melon seeds and asked casually, "A person can be like whatever he or she learns. Isn't that amazing?" Pei Qian nodded without hesitation. Of course it was amazing. Because its master was like that. It asked again, what if there was a person who could be like whatever he or she learns? Pei Qian thought for a moment, very scary. Pei Qian then said, if that's the case, it's easy to fight with others on the path of cultivation, isn't it? It wasn't a big problem to be like whatever he or she learned, but once he or she became whatever he or she learned, it would be too taboo to cultivate the path of cultivation. For example, the secrets of other sects' ancestral halls, or the innate supernatural powers of flying swords of sword cultivators. It rolled its eyes, pinch your nose and admit defeat. Fortunately, well water doesn't interfere with river water. At worst, we'll go our separate ways. He'll also find ways to compensate a little, but it depends on his mood. He has the final say on how to settle accounts and how to compensate. Others can only accept it. As for those who don't believe in heresy and insist on arm wrestling with him to the end, they're all dead. Baek-ok-kyung building has 5 cities and 12 buildings. 2 of them in history were pulled down by him. One relied on strength and Taoist techniques, and the other relied on calculation and Taoist heart. So, his relationship with the second master of the Baek-ok-kyung building sect is extremely bad. It emphasized its tone and added, extremely bad. The only difference between the two sides is that they're not life and death enemies. As long as they meet on the road, they'll definitely fight. Pei Qian asked curiously, "Why are you so afraid of him?" It stretched out its hand, "Let me rinse my mouth again." Pei Qian took out a pot of wine from the nearby objects, put it on the table, and pushed it over. It drank it in one gulp and sighed, "I'm still not brave enough to say it." Pei Qian said, "Forget it if you don't want to say it." It sighed with emotion, "Chen Pinggan taught you very well. A person's qi was clear and foul, in fact, it depended on whether he had a forgiving heart." Pei Qian smiled and said, "It's passable. Master taught me 100%, and I only learned 20 to 30%. It suddenly slammed the table and said angrily, "Little girl, why are you imitating me?" Pei Qian immediately reached out and pressed the table so as not to wake up Xiaomi. It angrily apologized to Pei Qian, I'm sorry. I can't help but reveal my true feelings." Pei Qian said without any reason, "When you go to Luopa Mountain in the future, you can go to the straw shop in Riding Dragon Alley first. There's an old senior there who should be able to chat with you." The white-haired boy looked doubtful. "Which old senior?" "Ascendant Realm? And a sword cultivator." Luopa Mountain was very good, including Ning Yaro, himself, and this old senior, 3 Ascendant. In the future, wouldn't he be able to walk like a crab every day in the vast world? Pei Qian shook his head and said, "Dragon Gate Realm." The white-haired boy spat, "What the hell, Dragon Gate Realm? I can't afford to lose face." Pei Qian stopped talking. The white-haired boy suddenly put his palms together, with a serious face, and said to himself, "Children's words carry no harm, children's words carry no harm. Thank you for your auspicious words, thank you for your auspicious words. I must go to Luopa Mountain and pay a visit to the Dragon Gate Realm Old Immortal in Riding Dragon Alley." Pei Qian suddenly looked at the otherworldly demon described by the white-haired boy and said softly, "You can only live in the hearts of others and become another yourself. It must be very hard." The white-haired boy was stunned. He sat cross-legged and ate melon seeds while smiling cheekily. "Little girl, you're so old that you don't know anything. When you talk about this, it's easy to say, but it can't comfort people." Pei Qian hummed and did not refute. She lay on the table, crossed her hands, and rested her pointed chin on her arm. The white-haired boy glanced at the young woman's hair bun. "You have to empathize with everything. Every time you experience sorrow and joy, it's not easy. So don't learn from your master in everything. Chen Pinggan doesn't want that either. Otherwise, just wait and see. If you practice the sword and cultivate, one day, the inner demon will appear in your heart. It will be as big as Mount Meru, blocking your path and making you suffer. At that time, you will know what hard work is." Back then, in the prison, there was a young man named Yu Yu. Fortune favors fools. He wanted to think too much, but he didn't know what to think. There was also a boy named Du Shanyin who lived a very self-centered life. He didn't care about good or bad things. As long as he could see, the good things were his. Everything was his. As long as it was worthless, he would rather break it than give it to others. He didn't have any rules in his heart. On the path of cultivation, these 2 kinds of people walked a little easier. After that, the 2 of them were silent. Xiaomi slept soundly, Pei Qian lay on the table in a daze, and the white-haired boy sat there in boredom. From time to time, he would put his hands together and raise them high above his head, muttering. He probably prayed to all the gods he could. In the end, it sighed and glanced at the night outside the window. It was grey, as if there was no end. That Wu Shuangjiang, to it and the former her, was a hurdle that was destined to be uncrossable. Back then, Wu Shuangjiang accomplished something first. The inner demon was her, and she was the inner demon. It was as if Wu Shuangjiang had set the whole framework and all the rules long ago. For this, Wu Shuangjiang carefully prepared for more than 100 years. How did Wu Shuangjiang break the inner demon? It was to become her inner demon. At that time, in the eyes of the old ancestors of the Year's Palace, Wu Shuangjiang had wasted 100 years at the bottleneck of the nascent soul realm. Everyone was more confused than the other. Why did Wu Shuangjiang, with such outstanding cultivation talent, stagnate in the nascent soul realm for so long? No one could imagine that Wu Shuangjiang had actually arranged a path for herself to ascend to the ascendant realm a long time ago. She even seemed to have prepared for how to reach the 14th realm. Just like a person, she was born with knowledge. However, whether it was her or the extraterrestrial demon, they knew one thing better than anyone else. Wu Shuangjiang was not born with knowledge. This man, who was usually silent, always gave people the impression of being dull, and at most calm, just liked to think too much. The white-haired boy had a headache. Just thinking about Wu Shuangjiang gave him a splitting headache. He held his head with both hands. Pei Qian came back to reality and handed over a pot of wine. It drank half the pot of wine in one breath. Out of the corner of its eye, it saw a small bag. It jumped up and bent over to take it. Unexpectedly, Pei Qian also stood up and gently held down the bag of dried fish. On this trip, Xiaomi had a lot of melon seeds, but not many dried fish. It could only grab a few dried fish from the stream and sat back to its original position. It threw them into its mouth and crunched. After a mouthful of dried fish and a sip of wine, it muttered, "When I was young, every time I lost a key, broke a bowl, or got scolded, I thought it was a big deal." Pei Qian did not understand why it said these things. Unexpectedly, the white-haired boy rubbed the corner of his eyes hard and tears of bitterness instantly filled his face. He cried and complained, "I'm still a child, still a child. Why should I be bullied by a great cultivator of the 14th realm? There's no such thing in the world. The elder of the hidden official has unparalleled martial arts and is invincible in the world. Beat him to death, beat that crazy bastard to death." Pei Qian rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Since his master was not around, he took a pot of wine for himself and poured it into a bowl. He took a sip of the wine. After the white-haired boy wiped his tears, he was still sobbing. When a child is in pain, he cries loudly. As for an adult. Speaking of this, he restrained his expression and muttered, "Living his life is like drinking alone." Pei Qian asked, "Pardon me for asking, but if Court Chief Wu dies and his Dao disappears, will you?" He hesitated for a moment but still nodded. There was some brilliance in his eyes as he said something that others would not be able to empathize with. "I'll also be reluctant." Before meeting Wu Shuangjiang, she hoped to regain her freedom and not have to worry about life and death. After meeting Wu Shuangjiang, she only hoped that she could be free and not be imprisoned in his heart. However, she also did not wish for Wu Shuangjiang to die and his Dao to disappear because she had always hoped that he would still exist in this world and live well. Pei Qian raised his wine bowl and handed it over to him. The white-haired boy raised his wine pot and clinked it lightly. Then, they both drank. Life's unhappiness was dispelled with wine and swallowed in one gulp. He asked tentatively, "Since we're best friends, how about 2 more dried fish?" Pei Qian smiled and directly put the bag of dried fish into his sleeve. He gave him a thumbs up and praised loudly, as expected of the elder of the hidden official's first disciple. "You've inherited his magnanimity and spirit." Pei Qian said something fair, "With your flattery skills and loud voice, you won't be able to eat melon seeds in my Luopo mountain." He thought for a moment and began to make a sincere wish. He said resolutely, "As long as I can go to Luopo mountain, I'll go to the shop in Dragon Riding Alley and work for the old immortal in the Dragon Gate Rel." In Rongzhuang City, the middle-aged scholar, who was the owner of the night boat, could no longer continue to watch the battle from afar because Luopo City had been isolated from heaven and earth. Therefore, he took out a booklet. After spreading it out, one page recorded the end of Sun Huaizhong of Xuanju Temple, and the next page recorded the beginning of Wu Shuangjiang's removal of the palace. On the night boat, today's battle was enough to leave a mark in history. One at the 14th realm, one at the Ascendant realm, 2 immortals whose combat power could not be underestimated by the current realm, and one at the 10th realm of the Jade Primitive realm. If the extraterrestrial demon joined the battlefield, no matter which camp it chose, there would be one more Ascendant realm. If Pei Qian followed it, there might be one more. Ultimate realm of the martial artist? The middle-aged scholar laughed. What a battle. Fortunately, it happened on our ferry. Otherwise, at least half of the mountains and rivers would have been destroyed. Shouldn't the Confucian temple record a merit for crossing the ferry? The officer was silent. The middle-aged scholar asked with a smile, if Wu Shuangjiang kept suppressing his realm at the Ascendant Realm, what are your chances of winning? The officer said, if he didn't break through the realm, I can only say that I have a chance to exchange my life. When he reaches the 14th realm and then ascends again, I won't have any chance of winning. The middle-aged scholar shook his head and said, that's why you shouldn't have chosen Wu Shuangjiang as your opponent. He was sure that if Chen Pinggan angered Wu Shuangjiang, the latter would definitely recover his 14th realm cultivation. In his hometown, Wu Shuangjiang dared to provoke even the Beko Keikyang building and the second master of the Daoist sect. When he came to the vast world, he wouldn't take the rules of the Confucian temple seriously. It was said that the head chief and his junior brother made a family rule in private. Within 100 years, when the second master of the Daoist sect was in charge of the Beko Keikyang building, Yu Do was not allowed to carry the immortal sword, and Wen Jian was not allowed to leave the palace. Other than his master, the Daoist ancestor, Yu Do, who was known to be invincible, only listened to his senior brother's advice. It wasn't just because he accepted disciples on behalf of his master. If the rumors were true, then the head chief of the Beko Keikyang building forbade his junior brother Yu Do and Wen Jian to leave the palace without permission because he was biased towards Wu Shuangjiang. The most underestimated grand cultivator in the vast world was Liu Qi, who turned the Willow Tendon realm into a retention realm. In the end, after Liu Qi returned to the vast world, he proved this point with facts. Even though the battlefield was on the ocean, he still managed to suppress the water spells of the sovereign stage Great Demon Yang Ji. In the vast world, according to a rumor that wasn't widely spread, Wu Shuangjiang was the other Lu Chen. Daoist Sun from the Da Shendu temple once jokingly said, Lu Chen, who can't be moved by the soles of your feet, and Wu Shuangjiang, who can't be removed with a bamboo stick. One of them had no real abilities and only knew how to disgust others. The other was even more troublesome than the Daoist himself. The middle-aged scholar kept flipping through the books and records on the ferry. He said slowly, during the middle 5 realms, Court Lord Wu's luck was the best in the world. Before the Ascendant Realm, Court Lord Wu had the most murderous aura and the most murderous intent. The number of times she fought with others was once again the first in the vast world. She was the best among the middle 5 realms cultivators. After ascending to the Ascendant Realm, she started to cultivate her mind and temperament. Her temperament changed drastically and she became especially aloof from worldly affairs. There were only 2 records of her fighting with Daoist Laro and Daoist Sunday. After that, she went into seclusion again and again without any evidence. She almost didn't see any outsiders. That's why she fell out of the top 10. In the books, there were more detailed records of the mountains and rivers. They recorded the process of Wu Shuangjiang's Dao seeking with some earth immortals and upper 5 realms cultivators. The lower Wu Shuangjiang's cultivation level was, the more records there were. The content was closer to the truth. The biggest characteristic of Wu Shuangjiang's path of cultivation was that he could come back from the dead. He was good at killing strong enemies in a desperate situation. However, this was only the result on the surface. The real strength was that Wu Shuangjiang was able to gather the strengths of many schools. He was also very practical. He was good at refining and using it for his own use. In the end, he reached a higher level. The Daoist techniques of the 5 cities and 12 buildings of the Beko Keikyang building, the lineage of the immortal sword of the Great Xuanju Temple, the talisman formation of the immortal staff mountains and rivers. Through the collection of secret Daoist techniques and clues, Wu Shuangjiang deduced the origin of various techniques and abhina. Wu Shuangjiang had dabbled in the talisman of Yu Xian and the thunder technique of the celestial master's abode of Dragon Tiger Mountain. As for how similar they were, he had never had the chance to verify it. The middle-aged scholar closed the book and asked with a smile, "How is it? Can you talk about that person? As long as you're willing to talk about it, I'll give you one of the 4 new cities on the ferry." The officer shook his head and said, "Mr. Zhong, You shouldn't ask about this matter anymore. The middle-aged scholar was a little regretful. Then it will forever be a no result in Goosefeather City. The officer said, this one won't make a difference. In the 10,000 years of history of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, there had always been 3 extremely important positions: the officer of the law, the hidden officer, and the priest. The first 3 grandmasters were Chen Qingju, the dragon god, and Guan Zhao. As time passed, the line of the law officers first took the limelight. The position of the hidden officers fluctuated. The priest gradually retreated behind the scenes. Furthermore, his identity was extremely hidden and was never made public. It was only in the recent 1,000 years that the high priests were even more obscure than the inquisitors. It was as if they had never existed in the first place. Not to mention young sword cultivators, even many sword immortals almost never thought about this insignificant matter. It could not be eaten as food, drunk as wine, or used as a flying sword to go out of the city to kill demons. What was the point of thinking about it? On the other hand, the hidden officer line had Xiao Chuo and Chen Pinggan. In the Great Wall of Sword Chi and the wilderness, they were extremely eye-catching. In the future, ordinary mountain cultivators would probably mistake the position of the Great Wall of Sword Chi for the position of the hidden officer. There were many books and secret files in the summer and winter residences of the hidden officials. However, there was no record of this matter at all. It was as if a few pages of an old calendar had been torn out. It could not even be considered a taboo. There was a small lake covered with lotus leaves. There was a small path that led to a pavilion in the middle of the lake. On the path, a man and woman stood there admiring the scenery. They didn't go to the pavilion where the middle-aged scholar and the officer were. A young man stood beside a young girl holding a bamboo basket. She was dressed simply and elegantly and had an extremely beautiful appearance. The young man was dressed in green and had a sword on his back. He was tall and had a small silver pouch around his waist. Countless fine golden rays seeped through the silver threads and were as brilliant as the sunset. He was the sword cultivator of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, Du Shanyin. He was thrown into the prison together with Yu Yu. Du Shanyin became the direct disciple of the penal officer while Yu Yu became Old Def's disciple in a daze. One followed the officer back to Howran while the other followed Old Def to the wilderness. The young girl beside Du Shanyin was called Ji Qing. She and Chang Ming had once depended on each other in the prison. Year after year, they washed clothes by the stream together. Chang Ming was the incarnation of the ancestor coin of the gold essence copper coin. Ji Qing was also the manifestation of the ancestor coin of a kind of immortal coin. Du Shanyin asked softly, Miss Ji Qing, is it really that Wu Shuangjiang who got rid of the palace all of a sudden? He's already at the 14th realm of Dao integration. Both parties at the pavilion didn't intentionally hide the content of their conversation. Du Shanyin listened to it silently and remembered it in his heart. Ji Qing smiled sweetly and nodded, it's most likely him. Du Shanyin rubbed his chin, since that boy is Wu Shuangjiang's heart devil, it's like he ran away from home. In that case, whether it's for public or private reasons, shouldn't the hidden officer be handed over? What's the point of fighting? It doesn't make sense. Ji Qing smiled and didn't say a word. Du Shanyin continued, what's more, the hidden officer is famous for being good at doing business. Over at the inn, why didn't he come to an agreement? In the end, he shed all pretense of cordiality. Both parties said ruthless words and started fighting. It doesn't seem like our hidden officer's style of doing things. Could it be that after returning to his hometown, the hidden officer has already established a connection with Middle-earth's Confucian temple with his Wen lineage identity and doesn't have to worry about a 14th realm cultivator from outside his hometown? Ji Qing shook her head and said softly, I don't know either. Du Shanyin smiled sinisterly, if it was in our Great Wall of Sword Chi, Wu Shuangjiang definitely wouldn't dare to make such a move. After all, Ning Yao isn't boss's sword immortal. Ji Qing had already turned her head to look at the lake. She was like a person standing in the clear water and holding up a lotus umbrella. The ripples were rippling and lotus leaves were everywhere. The fragrance was refreshing and refreshing. Occasionally, there would be pairs of mandarin ducks swimming in the water. The lotus leaves were like hair and the lotus flowers were like the makeup of a beauty. There was no wind and the flowers and leaves were moving. It was either fish or mandarin ducks. Ji Qing started to miss elder sister Changming. If there was a chance to meet this time, she would ask the hidden officer who was greedy for money. She remembered that when they first met, the young hidden officer was very well behaved when he first saw them. Later on, when he found out about her and elder sister Changming's Daoist roots, he smiled affectionately. The intimacy in his eyes could not be hidden. It seemed like there was no beauty in a man's eyes, only money. The young girl was in a good mood when she thought of this. She squatted down and smiled as she plucked the green lotus leaves. Du Shanyin smiled sinisterly. Miss Ji Qing, if you like these lotus leaves, I will tell Governor Ju to fill up a bamboo basket. Ji Qing's back was facing the young sword cultivator. She rolled her eyes playfully and was too lazy to say anything. This was not how money was earned in the world. It seemed like she had gotten a bargain by getting a basket of lotus leaves. However, was the incense on the mountain not money? Moreover, your relationship with that beautiful Mr. Ju isn't that close yet. Du Shanyin only mentioned it casually and did not think too much about it. It was just a basket of lotus leaves. It was not worth wasting time on. He was more concerned about his own cultivation. How to practice the sword, how to break through faster, how to improve the quality of the flying sword, how to become one of the 10 young people in the future. In the future, when he left his master's side and traveled alone, what he could do and what he could not do, such as whether he could bring Ji Qing with him, whether he needed to go to the South Suro continent to visit the old sword immortal Qi Tingji and Lu Ji. He needed to think about everything now. He was not the Yu Yu who was muddle-headed all day long. He hoped that after a few decades or 100 years, when he reunited with the Yu Yu who was the same age as him, the difference between them would be like heaven and earth. The master of the torture officer did not like to talk. Therefore, even though Du Shanyin spent all these years with him, he only knew a few things. He did not know his master at all. What was his name? How did he learn the sword? How did he become a sword immortal? And why did he become a torture officer in the Great Wall of Sword Qi? His master loved to drink, which was why he was called a drunkard in prison. However, after his master returned to Haoran world, he rarely drank. After he became Du Shanin's disciple, his master did not have many requests. He only said that when he mastered the sword technique and traveled Haoran world, he would kill any rapist he met on the mountain. Finally, his master, who was the torture officer, did not seem to have a good impression of anyone who owned a blessed land. Therefore, his master had always been hostile to the hidden official. At the pavilion, the middle-aged scholar waved his sleeve so that Du Shanyin could not hear another word. Then, he asked with a smile, "You are the only direct disciple. Do you have a grudge against Chen Pinggan in your hometown? Otherwise, why would you pretend to be blind when it comes to this matter when you are so quick-witted and think about all sorts of things every day? It seems like you can't wait to lend some of your killing intent to Court Chief Wu." The torture officer shook his head. He doesn't have any grudge against Chen Pinggan. They probably just don't see eye to eye. The middle-aged scholar smiled. Let's be serious. Let's not talk about the Great Wall of Sword Qi and Ascension City. There are so many sword cultivators of the lower 5 realms who were able to preserve their lives because of the hidden official's lineage in the Summer Refuge Palace. In the end, it should be thanks to that hidden official that he was able to become your direct disciple. Why is it that when Chen Pinggan encountered Court Chief Wu, who is at the 14th realm, who is denouncing him, this junior seems to be rejoicing in his misfortune? According to the meticulous deduction on the ferry, although the Great Wall of Sword Qi had fought for a few more years in that war, due to the arrangement of troops in the Summer Refuge Palace, an additional 18,000 people survived. This meant that when Ascension City reached the 5th realm, a large number of young sword cultivators appeared out of thin air. Even if their realms were not high, they had won the Ascension City the phenomenon of more sword fate gathering. Furthermore, the blossoming of every sword path seed might not be eye-catching in the former Great Wall of Sword Qi. It was nothing more than a matter of dying early or late on the battlefield. However, in the new realm, their influence was far-reaching and immeasurable. The torture officer said, "I'm not too sure. I can't be bothered to look into it." The middle-aged scholar laughed involuntarily. Aren't you worried about taking in such a disciple? However, there aren't many masters like you. When the young sword cultivator mentioned Wu Shuangsheng, the middle-aged scholar was about to help clean up the mess. Several golden words had quietly gathered in his palm. They were like birds in a cage, unable to flap their wings and fly out. Boss, the sword immortal threw it over. I can't not accept it. The torture officer said, I'm only responsible for imparting Du Shanin's swordsmanship. When he becomes a sword cultivator of the upper 5 realms, he will go out on his own. Whether he lives or dies in the future, whatever position he reaches in the end, it's all what he deserves. The middle-aged scholar asked with a smile, what if he uses you as his master every time he encounters danger? The torture officer said indifferently, let him be. Since he can recognize me as his master, whether it's luck or karma, it's all due to Du Shanin's ability. The middle-aged scholar nodded. This was also reasonable. The torture officer rarely took the initiative to ask. He asked Teacher Zhong a crucial question. Why is it that when he boarded this time, he was so restrained on your side, but so forceful on Chen Ping'an's side? It's as if this long journey is not just to capture that inner demon, but also to ask Chen Ping'an? Otherwise, just based on his 2 identities as a hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi and the last disciple of the Sage of Literature, he shouldn't be so overbearing. He wouldn't talk at all and would directly attack. The middle-aged scholar leaned against the railing and turned his head to look at the lotus leaves in the lake. The real reason is hard to explain. There's no need to waste effort to guess. Anyway, it'll only be a waste of effort. Now, there's only a vague clue. Court Chief Wu's inner demon Dao companion sneaked out of the lunar palace when he was in seclusion trying to break through. She followed the Daoist from the Da Shendu temple and left the Qingming world, causing him to fail in his breakthrough. As for Chen Ping'an, when he was in the North Continent, he should have been touring the ruins with Sun Daozhong. Somehow, he managed to obtain the secret inheritance of Taoism right under Sun Daozhong's nose. Among the natal items of the 5 elements, there was a statue in the image of that Daoist. I can follow the clues and see this scene. With his Dao skills, it's naturally not difficult for him to see through it. Since that Daoist has already passed away, seeking revenge is an extravagant hope. Then, he probably let Chen Ping'an take over. Or perhaps, he simply wants to calculate backward and perform a shocking evolution of the great Dao. After peeling out that Dao seed from Chen Ping'an's heart, it'll be the beginning of a mysterious great Dao. The middle-aged scholar put 2 fingers together and picked up a water droplet from the lake. He casually threw it onto a slanted lotus leaf and the water droplet rolled back into the water. The middle-aged scholar observed the minute process of the water droplet entering the water and smiled. So, if Chen Ping'an was replaced by anyone else, they wouldn't have met with such a calamity. Of course, if it were anyone else, they wouldn't have an ascendant realm heavenly demon by their side. Does this mean that everything is preordained by the heavens? The official frowned. With his realm, it's not difficult to peel off a 5 elements item from Chen Ping'an. But to reverse the great Dao? Can it really be done? The middle-aged scholar smiled knowingly and revealed the secret. You probably don't know, but his relationship with Lu Chen is quite good. It's said that he even used 7,200,000 coins to exchange for a Taishen Clear Life talisman personally made by Daoist Master by Gu according to some old rules. As for whether this talisman was used on his Daoist companion, or on that Daoist who wanted to start a new life in the Xuandu Temple, it's all just my personal guess now. The teacher sighed softly, there's no other way. Many times, the path that you and I have identified in our hearts is actually a path that people can't turn their heads from. The middle-aged scholar glanced at the young sword cultivator on the road. Upon closer inspection, Du Shanin's jumping thoughts and paths of thought seemed to be strung together by a series of words. After Teacher Zhong looked through them one by one, he smiled. Those who fear the strong bully the weak. The official said, it has nothing to do with me. The middle-aged scholar smiled. It really has nothing to do with you. Which part of the human world isn't the blessed land of your hometown? When the official heard this, he was silent and his expression was even more indifferent. The middle-aged scholar suddenly laughed loudly and said, you, the current criminal official, are actually not as good as the previous criminal official. the former Hao Ran Jiusheng. Before he became Wen Hai Ju, for better or for worse, he still left behind a city of rules and regulations for the human world. Looking at the young teacher, he patted his knee lightly and spoke slowly. If Bai was not only a scholar, but also a sword cultivator. If Chen Qing did not care about the consequences, only cared about being high-spirited, only for himself, using all his strength to attack, and asking for a savage world. If the blind old man in the 100,000 mountains and the old head of the East Sea Temple, the two most experienced cultivators of the 14th realm, were willing to come out for the vast world. If Yu Dou did not use his sword to travel the great Xuanju Temple, and did not kill that daoist. If Bai did not use his sword to support the Yarrow continent, and did not destroy the celestial sword Tai Bai, but instead returned it to its original owner. In the end, it was held in the hands of Sun Huaizhong of the Great Xuanju Temple, and then asked for a Beko Keikyang building. If the Great Wall of Sword Qi chose to side with the savage world, or take a step back and choose to be neutral, not helping either side and watching from the sidelines. If Xiao Hu Kuidong joined forces with his junior brother Qi Jingchun and blocked the path of the second ascension platform, the vast world would lose at least one or two more continents of mountains and rivers. The two sides would fight until the mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. The mountains and rivers would sink, and corpses would be everywhere. Then, an armored person would choose to use his body to fuse with the Tao, move the old site of the heavenly courts, cross the vast galaxy, and fall into the vast world. The Sage of Rites would be forced to absorb the destiny of heaven and earth and reach the 15th realm. He would risk his life to stop more than half of this matter. In the end, there were still many gods who truly returned. Chaos would engulf the four worlds, and it was almost equivalent to returning to the great chaos of 10,000 years ago. The Beko Keikyang building shook, the Buddhist kingdom shook, the heavenly demons wreaked havoc, and ghosts ran amok. The middle-aged scholar sighed. What is the most difficult barrier for a scholar? The official said, as a wild old man, I meet a vagrant. The middle-aged scholar scolded jokingly, so UF** king no too? It was like a journey in life, a small boat in the cold night, and the wind and rain blew the reed flowers. Anyway, there were reed flowers every year. If thousands of them were blown down in one night, it was nothing. The official nodded. I once knew. 778. Wu Shuangjiang looked at the constellation map before, so he didn't want to fight with Kui Dongshan too much. He took out 4 imitation swords and broke the restriction of the first small world easily. He came to the back of the mountain-searching tactical matrix. Facing thousands of spells like arrows, Wu Shuangjiang twirled talisman and turned into a human. The woman in the fox coat turned into a cloud sea with a pair of flying shoes made of white clouds under her feet, suppressing the monsters in the mountain. The handsome young man put his hand on his belt and took out a jade tablet from his bag, which could naturally restrain those mountain-searching immortal generals. On the cloud and on the mountain, it was like two armies were facing each other. One side was the mountain-searching tactical matrix, while the other side only had 3 people. Wu Shuangjiang used his supernatural power again, not willing to let the 4 people hide and watch the show. In addition to Kui Dongshan, Ning Yarrow, Chen Pinggan, and Jiang Shangzhen all ignored the restriction of heaven and earth. Mysterious figures who looked like lovers in their hearts appeared in front of them. Ning Yarrow looked at the high-spirited green-robed swordsman and sneered. Pretending to be mysterious, he couldn't even learn it. She cut off his head with a casual sword. If the real Chen Pinggan were to see this scene, he would probably feel that hiding the scroll of teaching all the women in the world how to put on makeup was not unnecessary at all. Unexpectedly, the green-robed swordsman reformed. His expression and voice were exactly the same as the real Chen Pinggan, as if he met his beloved woman after a long separation. Miss Ning, I haven't seen you for a long time. I miss you very much. Ning Yarrow raised her eyebrows slightly. He was really courting death. She cut him again and broke him again. After that, as long as the green-robed swordsman reformed his body, Ning Yarrow would cut him with her sword. Many times, she even waited for him for a while intentionally or unintentionally. In short, she was willing to give him a chance to show up, but never gave him a chance to speak. Every time Ning Yarrow attacked with her sword, although it was just a line of swordlight, Each seemingly thin and dazzling sword light had a kind of sword style that could break the rules of heaven and earth. However, she controlled her sword very well. She didn't destroy the caged bird, but she could make the green-robed swordsman absorbed by the sword light. It was like a sword cutting out ultimate ruins, which could forcibly pull the surrounding seawater and even the water of the Milky Way into it and finally turn it into endless nothingness. To put it simply, this green-clothed swordsman before him, Chen Pinggan, was completely unable to fight against Ning Yarrow, who was at the Ascendant Realm. The swordsman seemed to be ruthless in his heart. Suddenly, another replica of the caged bird appeared. Ning Yarrow's face was expressionless. She didn't restrain her sword aura. The replica of heaven and earth that had just appeared, together with the majestic sword rain of the moon in the well, suddenly shattered into thousands of pieces like colored glass. The brilliance of heaven and earth was blurred and the scene was magnificent. An Ascendant Realm female cultivator walked slowly with a sword in her hand. The hair on her temples fluttered slightly, which set off her extremely beautiful appearance. There was no other color in the world. In the lawless place where the formation was set up, Chen Pinggan, who had been quietly waiting for Wu Shuang to come as a guest, stood up. He put his Night Ranger sword back into its scabbard. A pair of daggers slid out from his sleeves. He took a step to the side and held his sword Ning Yarrow. A sword light fell straight on the spot. Chen Pinggan stomped on the ground and instantly appeared behind the illusion of Ning Yarrow. He pressed his palm against the back of her head and crushed it on the spot. He then swept his sword behind him. Chen Pinggan floated and landed dozens of feet away. He frowned slightly and immediately restrained his thoughts. The illusion of the woman's body didn't move at all. Only her head turned back and looked at Chen Pinggan with a smile full of sarcasm. This was because the sword deity in her hand that flowed with golden light was only in a strange state between reality and illusion. However, when Chen Pinggan slightly thought about it, the long sword in the woman's hand and the robe on her body instantly became incomparably close to the truth in Chen Pinggan's heart. This meant that this woman, who had manifested out of nowhere, had her battle prowess skyrocketed. However, another thought accidentally flashed through Chen Pinggan's mind. The woman's lips moved slightly, as if she said the two words "come here." In the lawless small world, wisps of ancient essence sword intent were born out of thin air. They were like 4 long swords that had condensed into substance. The sword intent then separated into tiny sword chi that crisscrossed and protected the woman's world together. She nodded slightly and smiled with her eyes squinted. The number 1 person in the world is indeed worthy of the title. Chen Pinggan felt a headache and understood. This Wu Shuangjiang's divine ability was really played sinisterly to the extreme. Chen Pinggan hurriedly restrained all the complicated thoughts about Ning Yarrow in his mind. The woman smiled and said, "Is this enough?" The sword that broke the enchantment of the night boat earlier was the real cultivation of the Ascendant Realm. With this sword and the robe, there are 2 immortal weapons. I have to thank you. It's becoming more and more real. Oh, I forgot, you and I don't need to thank each other. It's too distant. Chen Pinggan didn't feel that he couldn't fight, but it was a little tricky. No matter how powerful Wu Shuang was, the woman in front of him who looked like a painting copy was not the real Ning Yarrow after all. She was not a real Ascendant Realm sword cultivator. Whether it was the support of Wu Shuang's mind, her spiritual aura foundation, the longsword sword deity, and the robe golden wine, as long as Chen Pinggan could restrain his mind, her body and all external objects would continue to be worn down and eventually dissipate. A lawless place was the best battlefield. Moreover, it was not all bad that Chen Pinggan was trapped in this realm. It was just right to train the physique of a martial artist of the 10 realms. However, it was really difficult to deal with. Chen Pinggan took a deep breath, and his figure was slightly bent, as if a heavy burden of thousands of kilograms had been removed from his shoulders all of a sudden. Previously, when he boarded the ship, he had been walking in Entry City as a martial artist of the 8 realms. Even when he went to find Ning Yarrow, he was at the peak of the peak realm. Now, he was really at the peak of the peak realm. Unexpectedly, there was a Ning Yarrow behind the woman. She was like a piece of paper that was split by a sword. It was Ning Yarrow who came here with a sword. The real Ning Yarrow and the fake Ning Yarrow were immediately determined. Ning Yarrow took a step forward and came to Chen Ping'an's side. She frowned slightly. What did you talk to her about? In the next moment, a scholarwood sword appeared out of thin air from the sword box behind Ning Yarrow. Chen Ping'an swept out his arm, smashing it into Ning Yarrow's face. She was sent flying hundreds of feet away. Chen Ping'an formed a sword seal with one hand, using his fingersword technique as a flying sword that pierced through her head. His left hand shot out a seal, and 5 bolts of thunder gathered together. Lines of mountains and rivers appeared on his palm, containing the 5 thunder righteous art. It wrapped around Ning Yarrow, who had 2 scholarwood swords hidden in the sword box. It was like a bolt of heavenly tribulation had arrived. Dao arts rapidly smashed down, shattering her body. Chen Ping'an narrowed his eyes. His hands shook his sleeves, and his attitude was relaxed. He calmly waited for the next Ning Yarrow to appear. Just now, he had only been thinking about the scholarwood swords that had little to do with combat strength, but this had caused her to give herself away. And on Jiang Shangzhen's side, he stared in a daze at a delicate girl with tears on her face. She slowly walked over and stopped in front of him. She had only lightly kicked him and punched him. Her punches were as light as cotton, neither painful nor ticklish. She pursed her lips and raised her head. She looked at the slender man and sobbed, Jiang Lang, how have you grown so old? You even have white hair. Jiang Shangzhen's eyes were clear. He looked at the girl in front of him, but he thought about the girl in his heart. They were not the same person at all. He smiled, I've never seen her cry in my entire life. Who do you think you are? He seemed to find her too much of an eyesore. He gently stretched out his hand and pushed her head aside. She stumbled and fell to the ground. She sat there, biting her lips and looking at the heartless man with a face full of resentment. Jiang Shangzhen, whose hair was slightly white, only looked into the distance. He muttered, my heart is not a good place to rest, it cannot be swept away. Within the small world of the mountain-searching formation, where the naive imitation sword was suspended, Jiang Shangzhen stretched out his hand and rubbed his neck. His head had probably been placed a little off before. He supported it with both hands and gently twisted it a little. He sighed, fighting a 14th realm cultivator really takes a lot of effort. Now, for some reason, I feel that Pei Min's expression is kind and extremely amiable. The 4 swords stood in the 4 corners of the mountain-searching formation. Sword chi shot up into the sky like 4 candles as tall as mountains, burning 4 pitch-black holes in the Taiping scroll. So, if Wu Shuangjiang wanted to leave, he could just choose a door and take the 2 handmaidens with him. However, Wu Shuangjiang clearly had no intention of leaving just yet. Jiang Shangzhen's eyesight was good. He could immediately tell that the handsome young man beside Wu Shuangjiang was actually the same person as the woman in the fox fur coat. They were of different ages. One was the young woman in Wu Shuangjiang's memory, while the other was just a young woman who was slightly older. As for why the woman dressed as a man, Jiang Shangzhen felt that there was a real reason behind it. Wu Shuangjiang turned around and spoke softly with young natural. His gaze was gentle, his voice was mellow, and it was filled with an expression of tender affection that wasn't faked. He explained to her the difference between the minor worlds in the world. Saints reside in minor worlds, whereas immortals rely on creation divine abilities, talismans, formations, or their hearts to create the sun, moon, stars, rivers, and mountains. All of them are good divine abilities, but they're divided into grades. The saints of the 3 sects are in charge of the academies, Daoist temples, and temples. The saints of the military school are in charge of the ancient battlefields. The world is the most real, and the rules of the great Tao operate in an orderly manner. It is the most flawless. Therefore, it is ranked first. Other than the patriarchs of the 3 sects, Chen Qingdu is in charge of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, which is the most lethal. The blind old man is in charge of the 100,000 mountains, which is the most sturdy. Zhu Zi of the School of Moism built the city and created the world by himself. Although the other 2 are not reliable, they are close to the peak of the geographical and human strength of a refiner. Most importantly, they are good at both offense and defense. Mr. Kui's constellation map seemed to be vast and boundless, but he did something to the consciousness of the cultivators who fell into it. It was the most suitable for trapping and killing immortals. However, it would be difficult to deal with an ascendant state cultivator. As for the small world of the mountain-searching formation, the essence is that it is uncertain whether it is real or fake. There are so many supernatural powers, spells, and offensive treasures. How can they be real? It is just that 9 of them are fake and 1 of them is real. Otherwise, the merit points that Jiang Shangzhen accumulated in the battlefield of the Tongya continent and the Confucian temple would at least double. However, it was Jiang Shangzhen's natal flying sword, which had long been hidden in it. It could be exchanged with any divine general, monster, magical equipment, or technique at will. As long as any of them managed to get close to him, a regular cultivator would be beheaded by the flying sword in a battle. Unfortunately, the biggest problem of every small world like the heart and rune arrays is that there is a one that has already been fixed. It can't circulate the great Tao and grow endlessly. Therefore, for the constellation map and the mountain searching array, if it weren't for the fact that I was in a hurry and wanted to see more fresh sceneries, I could have waited for Mr. Kui and Jiang Shangzhen to exhaust the one before I went to the next world. Kui Dongshan flicked his sleeves again and again, sweeping away the lingering aura of the sword that was stirred up by the genuine imitation swords. The pitiful peace scroll of the mountain searching painting was nailed to the desk by 4 imitation swords. It was more like a few people were holding lamps and looking at it from a close distance. As a result, the 4 corners of the scroll showed a slight yellow color of different degrees. However, Jiang Shangzhen didn't feel any heartache at all. Kui Dongshan's expression was even more composed. He smiled and said, "When sword cultivators fight in pairs, it's like fighting on the battlefield. Old Wei is right. It's nothing more than a fixed formation. When Qi cultivators exchange pointers in Tao, it is like a temple of 2 kingdoms. It depends on who has more tricks up their sleeves. Different styles, different tastes. Let's not be scared out of our wits by Court Chief Wu. It is definitely a first for us to gather 4 swords. Court Chief Wu may look relaxed, but she has put in a lot of effort." Wu Shuangjiang stood in the sky and nodded from afar. He laughed heartily and said, "Mr. Kui's prediction is right. I was going to ask Sword Xuanju Temple first before asking Dao Larawa about swordsmanship. It is a rare opportunity for us to meet on the ferry. Mr. Kui can also be seen as a sword cultivator. I can use the few of you to practice and ask each other about swordsmanship. I only hope that Immortal Yu and Immortal Pu can ascend. The 4 sword immortals can work together to kill a 14th level cultivator. Don't let me underestimate the sword cultivators of Howren." Jiang Shangzhen stretched out his hand and a banner appeared in his hand. He shook it vigorously. He still looked like a little demon, cursing and spitting saliva everywhere. "I think I am a person who knows how to chat. I know how to flatter and disgust others. I didn't expect to meet another enemy of Tao besides Brother Du. I can't tolerate flirting. I really can't. Brother Kui, don't stop me. I must meet this old immortal Wu today." As the banner shook, strong winds blew. Strange phenomena appeared in the world again. Except for the immortal generals and demons in the mountain who had retreated, they started to ride the wind to kill the 3 people in the sky. Among them, there were 4 immortal generals who were the most eye-catching. One of them was 1,000 feet tall. He stepped on a flood dragon and held a huge sword in both hands. He led the army to kill Wu Shuangjiang and the other 2 people. A guardian of the giant spirit mountain was standing on the peak of the mountain that the turtle was carrying. He was holding the demon-locking mirror in his hand. Under the sun, a beam of light shot out from the mirror. A beam of sword light was like a rolling river. Wherever it passed by, countless spirit creatures were injured. The sharp sword light, which seemed to contain the essence of the endless sun, dashed directly to the jade tablet that was hovering in the air like a moon. A immortal general in golden armor had 3 heads and 6 arms. He held a saber, a spear, a sword, and a halberd. He flashed and appeared in front of Wu Shuangjiang in a few steps. A heavenly official with a fluttering ribbon held a peeper in her arms. She had a strange appearance with 1 head and 4 faces. The jade tablet that was suspended in the air was hit by the light beam of the demon-locking mirror for a long time. Sparks flew everywhere, and a golden rainstorm fell between heaven and earth. Finally, the first crack appeared on the jade tablet, and a cracking sound came from it. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and said, "Keep it. After all, it is an object that has been kept for many years." The young man nodded and was about to keep the jade tablet. Unexpectedly, there was a green sword light in the light beam from the demon-locking mirror on the top of the mountain. It was not easy to detect. It was like a fish hiding in the river. It was as fast as lightning and was about to hit the broken part of the jade tablet in an instant. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and casually showed a Dharma form. He stretched out his hand and cupped a mirror light that was as big as a lake in his palm. There was a tiny green fish that was bumping around. However, in the vision of a 14th state grand cultivator, it was still clearly visible. The Dharma form put its palms together and crushed the mirror light, leaving only the sword chi and the divine will. It could be used as a reference and finally refined into Jiang Shangzhen's natal flying sword that was close to the truth. Wu Shuangjiang retracted his Dharma form and opened his hand. There was a tiny green snake in his palm. It was suppressed by the great Tao and had to shrink to this size. Otherwise, it would show its true form. Wu Shuangjiang suddenly smiled and shook his head. Logically speaking, the immobile green snake suddenly grew bigger. It had horns on its head, 4 claws on its abdomen, and a pair of pale golden eyes. It was clearly a water dragon. It wrapped around Wu Shuangjiang's arm. Wu Shuangjiang shook his arm gently, and the blood and flesh of the water dragon instantly turned into nothingness. Only the virtual image of the water dragon was left. It was like a white dragon drawing in golden ink. It was still entangled with the water dragon. One of Wu Shuangjiang's sleeves was twisted by the water dragon. The water dragon opened its mouth and bit Wu Shuangjiang's robe. It tried to touch the skin of a 14th state cultivator. Wu Shuangjiang smiled coldly and said, "You are just a water dragon. Why don't you return to Jianghu?" A ray of light flashed across Wu Shuangjiang's robe. The water dragon disappeared without a trace. After a while, it fell directly into the world of the robe. It was then refined in an instant. The water dragon was not only stained with Jiang Shangzhen's sword will as a disguise. It also had a refining method as a smokescreen. In other words, this method was not done at the last minute after meeting Wu Shuangjiang. It was premeditated. Otherwise, Wu Shuangjiang, as the world's top refiner, would not have met with such an accident. Whether it was refining swords or items, he was one of the few great cultivators who stood at the top of the mountain. Otherwise, how could he even refine the inner demon? Even an ascendant realm otherworldly demon was going to be refined by him again. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and asked, "You have so many methods. Which great cultivator were you originally planning to target? The swordsmanship pay minute? Or was it me from the beginning?" It seems like Xiao Bai's appearance back then was a little superfluous. When Inverted Hanging Mountain ascended and returned to the Qingming world, the 4 wandering cultivators of the Suichu Palace followed the square mountain word seal back home. Only Xiao Bai, the guardian of the year, went to the ruins of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. He met with the young hidden official who guarded half of the city wall with a secret technique and proposed a deal. He promised Chen Pinggan that as long as he agreed to hand over the external demon, he was willing to work for Chen Pinggan or the Fifth World's Ascendant City as a guest for 100 years. Everyone in the Qingming world knew that the guardian of the Suichu Palace had an extremely high cultivation base and great killing power. When Wu Shuangjiang was in seclusion, he relied on Xiao Bai to guard the Stork Tower. Under his planning, the power of the sect increased instead of decreasing. Xiao Bai did not treat the young hidden official that he had known for many years as a fool. Friendship was friendship, business was business. After all, the external demon that escaped from the Suichu Palace not only had a conflict with the palace lord Wu Shuangjiang, he would also be the mortal enemy of the entire Suichu Palace. As Wu Shuangjiang's Daoist partner, the white-haired boy that escaped to the prison of the Great Wall of Sword Qi was a real heavenly demon. According to the rules of the mountain, he was not a naughty little girl that ran away from home. It seemed that as long as the elders of the family found him, he could be casually brought home. This was just like the first disciple of the Wen sage, Xiao Hu, who betrayed his master. Qi Jingchun built the Cliff Academy in Dali. Naturally, he would not talk about friendship with Kui Dong. Whether it was facing Kui Dongshan at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Alliance, or even reuniting with the imperial tutor, Kui Dong in the capital of Dali, at least on the surface, they could not be said to be happy. However, unexpectedly, the young hidden official rejected the suggestion of being the guardian of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Business was business, and schemes were schemes. Originally, as long as Chen Pingan agreed to this matter, in the Ascension City and the Fifth World, with Little White's cultivation and identity, as well as her alliance with the sword cultivators, the entire world would gradually become a bloody battlefield within 100 years. Every battlefield ruins would be Little White's training ground. The Great Wall of Sword Qi seemed to have gained the upper hand and was unparalleled within 100 years. It was like a hot knife through butter, and it had the geographical advantage. However, in exchange for the loss of time and people, as an invisible price, the Great Wall of Sword Qi even had a chance to replace the position of the Ascension City. The sword cultivators in the world loved to kill. Little White actually did not like to kill people, but she was very good at it. However, since Little White and Chen Pingan did not come to an agreement and were unable to help the Great Wall of Sword Qi gain the upper hand, Wu Shuangjiang did not mind. He did not feel that it was a pity. Wu Shuangjiang was not very interested in the so-called power of the world, the expansion of sects, and whether or not they could surpass Sun Huizhong's Da Xiandu Temple. Perhaps because they did not want the Peace Scrolls mountain search map to be destroyed too early, the two imitation swords, Tai Bai and Naive, suddenly disappeared. Following the clues, they headed towards the world where Ning Yarrow and Chen Pingan were. The four immortal swords were all things that Wu Shuangjiang had refined. They were not natal items of great refinement. Moreover, they could not achieve great refinement. Not only Wu Shuangjiang could not do it, even the owners of the four real immortal swords were powerless. In order to forge the embryos of the four immortal swords, Wu Shuangjiang had spent countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures. On his path of cultivation, Wu Shuangjiang had long since collected and purchased dozens of flying swords left behind by sword immortals before finally smelting and refining them. In fact, when Wu Shuangjiang was an earth immortal of the Golden Core stage, he had already had this whimsical idea. Furthermore, he had begun to plan step by step, accumulating his foundation bit by bit. The Daoist scripture, Tai Bai, and the three swords of the 10,000 arts were still fine. After all, they had been in the world for a long time. Only Ning Yarrow's Naive had Wu Shuangjiang waiting for many years. Therefore, on this night boat journey, Ning Yarrow ascended to the vast world with her sword in hand, and finally came here to meet up with Chen Pingan, who had a section of Tai Bai's sword tip. To Wu Shuangjiang, this was quite a pleasant surprise. The two swords went far away in search of Ning Yarrow and Chen Pingan. Of course, it was to steal more of Naive and Tai Bai's sword intent. However, Ning Yarrow's sword was too fast, and the key was that her sword intent was too pure. It was extremely difficult to capture even a strand of it. The young hidden official was too cautious, and he simply kept the sword. The harvest was less than Wu Shuangjiang expected. The young man in white smiled but didn't say anything. His figure dissipated, and he went to the next heart image small world, the great swamp of Jiyu Shu. However, before he left, a snow-white sleeve flipped, and the four words drawing legs on a snake that Wu Shuangjiang spoke of were condensed into golden words. He kept them in his sleeve and brought them to the heart image small world. In the great swamp of Jiyu Shu, Kui Dongshan threw out the four golden words. Thousands of flood dragons felt as if they had received a heavenly decree from a sage. They didn't need to transform into flood dragons. Wu Shuangjiang recalled the young man in white's green bamboo cane from before. As he pondered, an object materialized in his hand. It was an ancient green bamboo cane, decorated with a green jade head. The color of the jade was verdant and did not lose out to the willow leaf. The 12 faces of the green jade resembled a full moon seal. There were a total of 36 words inscribed on it, starting with the word channeling qi. There were only 36 ancient characters, but it was an ancient Tao formula with an extremely high seniority. Among them, There was a sentence, the heavens above, the earth below. Until now, there were differing opinions. Because of this sentence, many side branches of the Great Tao had evolved. According to Lu Chen's explanation, there were still many interpretations. Wu Shuangjiang threw away the green bamboo cane in his hand and followed the young man in white to the great swamp of Jiushu. The transformation of the green bamboo into a dragon was the secret technique of the Celestial Staff Mountain's founder. It was as if a real dragon had appeared. It pressed its claw on the ground and crushed the mountain beside the great swamp of Jiushu. With a sweep of its tail, it split the water of a huge lake into two, tearing a ravine 10,000 feet long. The lake water seeped into the ravine, revealing the ancient dragon palace at the bottom of the lake. The sword gleam in the heart image small world arrived one after another. A dragon formed from a green bamboo cane, with shiny dragon scales, exchanged one scale for one sword with the sword gleam of the sword immortal. Wu Shuangjiang put two fingers together and pinched a hairpin in the style of a green bamboo. His movements were gentle as he pinned it in the bun of the woman in the fox fur coat. Then, a small and exquisite rattledrum appeared in his hand. He smiled and handed it to the handsome young man. The small drum's peachwood handle was refined from a section of the ancestral peach tree of the great Xiandu temple. The painted drum's surface was sewn with dragon skin. At the end of the drum, there was a glass bead hanging with a red string. Regardless of whether it was the red string or the precious bead, they both had their origins. The red string came from Liu Qi's blessed land, while the precious bead came from a secret realm of the deep-sea dragon palace. They were both personally obtained by Wu Shuangjiang and personally refined. However, these two items that Wu Shuangjiang possessed were not real objects. They could be seen as real treasures on the mountain. Ordinary sects could even use them as treasures to guard the mountain. However, for Wu Shuangjiang, they were just like a lover's token. Wu Shuangjiang was a person. His thoughts were whimsical. His spells were good at adding flowers to brocade. For the common folk at the foot of the mountain, it was never a burden to have more skills. The more skills one had, the better. However, for the cultivators at the peak of the mountain, there was ultimately a bottleneck in the size of the small world of the human body. There was also a fixed amount of spiritual energy. The closer one was to the 14th level, the more they had to make choices. For example, Venerable Fiery Dragon was proficient in the three techniques of fire, thunder, and water. It was already an exaggerated realm that was shocking enough. As for why he did not continue to cultivate the three techniques of metal, wood, and earth, even Venerable Fiery Dragon had to admit that as long as he was still at the 13th level, he could not cultivate them. He could only learn a little and it would be difficult for him to improve further. In fact, when one reached the Ascendant realm, even if one was in the Immortal realm, as long as one was not a sword cultivator, they would not be lacking in heavenly treasures. However, there would be a bottleneck in the number of natal items. Therefore, the three ways of Tao unification at the 14th level was a great alternative. As for Wu Shuangjiang, before he reached the 14th level, he had already reached the extreme of having more skills is not a burden. He could forge a furnace and it was unpredictable. It could be said that he had reached the acme of perfection. The graceful lady in the snow-white fox fur took out the hairpin flying sword. After the flying sword flew more than 10,000 feet away, it turned into a green river. The long river drew a circle in the air and turned into a green jade ring. The green river spread out and finally turned into a thin letter. In the letter, there were densely packed words. In each of the words, a lady in green floated down. There were thousands of faces. They had the same appearance and the same clothes. However, each lady's expression was slightly different. It was like a painting master who was holding a brush and painting. He had been staring at his beloved for a long time. He had drawn thousands of scrolls with his brush. Although the scrolls were detailed, it was only a painting of her happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy in a day. As for the young lady who was as handsome as a noble young master, Tianran, she only needed to gently shake the rattledrum. Just one hit of the glass bead on the dragon gate drum could make thousands of divine generals, strong soldiers, demons, and ghosts fall down. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and said, "Don't be fooled by Mr. Kui and Jiang Shangzhen's words today. They are both scheming and scheming. The young lady kept plucking the small drum and nodded with a smile. Wu Shuangjiang sensed another sign of heaven and earth and nodded. Ningyao Genshin is really rare. The lady in the fox fur frowned slightly. Wu Shuangjiang immediately turned his head and apologized. Sister Tianran, don't be angry, don't be angry. The young lady squinted her eyes like crescent moons. She covered her mouth and laughed. Wu Shuangjiang looked at the young lady who was the little immortal with a yellow ribbon in his heart and then turned his head to look at the lady in the fox fur who had a slightly different face. He took their hands and smiled. I once promised you that we would walk the world hand in hand. I will do it. The lady in the fox fur suddenly asked, have you forgotten who killed me? Wu Shuangjiang smiled and said, that's not cute at all. The lady in the fox fur instantly became as brittle as porcelain. With a soft sound, she shattered with a bang. The young lady also suffered the same fate. Wu Shuangjiang used the shushing cloud technique. A strong wind swept the world and a mountain-searching formation was instantly shattered. He came to the small world of the caged bird. 779. Wu Shuangjiang was trapped in the sword formation. He was like a bird in a cage, but he was also in a lawless place that could restrain qi cultivators. He did not expect Chen Pinggan to know how to set up a formation. Wu Shuangjiang was very surprised that he was able to gain the upper hand with the help of Jiang Shangzhen's willow leaf against a 14th level cultivator. A fist from a Realm 10 martial artist was like a flying sword attack. For any cultivator at the peak of the mountain, this was not a light blow. The toughness of a qi cultivator's body was always a weakness. Unless it was the 14th level Dao unification at the right time and in the right place, it could be considered a true rebirth and longevity. Relatively speaking, Dao unification cultivators were more in the path of killing power. They pursued the pinnacle and took a big step forward. For pure martial artists, there was an insurmountable gap between the 9th level and the 10th level. For mountain climbing cultivators, it was even more difficult to ascend to the 14th level in the Ascendant realm. Wu Shuangjiang kept the green-robed swordsman that was confronting Ning Yao and stood side by side with Ning Yao. They stood on both sides of Wu Shuangjiang. Wu Shuangjiang handed the 4 immortal swords to them. Chen Pinggan carried Tai Bai on his back and held the 10,000 spells in his hand. Ning Yao pretended to be innocent and held the Daoist scripture in his hand. Both of them were instructed by Wu Shuangjiang to find an opportunity to shatter the small world. At the very least, they had to break the restriction of this small world. As for the sword formation, of course, Wu Shuangjiang was the one who led the sword. Being in a lawless place, every time one used a spell or supernatural power, they would need to consume spiritual qi. Wu Shuangjiang was no exception. After all, for a Dao unification cultivator like Bai Yi, as long as he had a poem in his heart, he could continuously attack with his sword. It was too unbelievable. Thousands of flying swords shot towards him. Wu Shuangjiang put 2 fingers together and formed a seal. He was like a god standing upright. Stars appeared around him. He actually copied Kui Dongshan's constellation diagram. The group of stars revolved around each other, and there were numerous threads that were faintly discernible between them. The stars moved in an orderly manner, and the Dao insight was abundant. Wu Shuangjiang pointed twice in the air, and 2 more suns and moons appeared. The suns, moons, and stars circulated endlessly, and they formed a grand formation with a square sky and a square earth. The densely packed flying swords were like tens of thousands of sword cultivators. They worked together to control their swords and soared into the sky to attack Wu Shuangjiang, who was like a god in the middle. The attacks of the flying swords were endless, and the illusory stars shattered one after another. However, under Wu Shuangjiang's control, they recovered to their original state. Wu Shuangjiang raised his head and looked over. He probably felt that he might not be able to stop the sword formation, so he raised his hand again. His palm was filled with a large pile of seeds. He tilted his hand, and the seeds fell from his palm one after another. A layer of dark green ripples appeared at the place where Wu Shuangjiang and the 2 sword attendants were hovering. The seeds seemed to have fallen into the water, and they tinkled. They actually caused circles of golden ripples of qi to ripple in this place. Wu Shuangjiang was adept at creating small worlds. There was a round moon hanging from the branches of a cassia tree. Under the tree, there was a god holding an axe in the shape of a cassia tree. This was the scene of the ancient moon palace. There was a peach blossom tree, and the branches were filled with talisman kites. They were overflowing with golden light. This was the method of a certain Daoist from the Da Xian Du temple. The lotus flowers were slender and elegant. They were uneven in height and size. This was the beautiful scene of the lotus paradise. After the flying swords transformed from the moon in the well were shattered, a string of golden words would hover on the spot. They were all talisman characters drawn by Kui Dongshan. They were either sages' poems, true forms of the 5 mountains of different dynasties, or various versions of Baizi's mountain-searching maps in history. Every time the flying swords and talisman characters advanced, it was as if an army was pressing forward. With the sword formation opening the way and the talisman paving the way, they would smash open a path for the constellations. Lotus flowers would rush over to mend the hole. After every golden kite on the peach tree floated down from the branches, there would be a Daoist in green with a blurry face. He held a golden horsetail whisk in his hand and hovered in the sky. He guarded the pass alone. With a sweep of the horsetail whisk, he could turn the countless sword tips of the river of sword formation and collide with the sword formation behind him. The burly man in the posture of divine General Tu Gui from the Moon Palace had a pair of golden eyes. His gaze wandered around and at a certain moment, he would throw the axe in his hand. Not only did he destroy the sword formation that was as mighty as the Milky Way, but he would also occasionally flash and disappear. He ignored the prohibition of the sword formation and went straight to Chen Pingan's real body. Chen Pingan found that he could not avoid it in time. He could only reveal a Dharma form. He was dressed in a bright red robe and was thousands of feet tall. He crushed the giant axe with one palm. There were too many flying swords. The sword formation was layered and endless. It hung in the sky like an army gathering, ready to attack. Wu Shuangjiang was a little surprised. One of the flying swords was caused by the natal magical power. It was not surprising that Chen Pingan took advantage of the time and place. However, when he controlled the second natal flying sword, Chen Pingan was in his own small world. Although he did not need to consume too much spiritual energy, it was definitely a lot of wear and tear for a cultivator's spirit. This meant that this young recluse not only relied on the body of a martial artist, but also on the cultivation on the mountain and the cultivation of his Taoist heart. Otherwise, a sword cultivator in the Jade primitive realm would have been dizzy to control so many flying swords. The axe of Tu Gui was not very lethal. The only good thing about it was that it did not focus on the killing power. It was specially used to find people. In fact, it was a jade axe talisman made by Wu Shuangjiang. It was recognized as a big talisman on the mountain, just like the ascendant state cultivator in the mountain and water barrier breaking talisman. When Wu Shuangjiang fought with others, it was mostly like this. Every spell and every talisman would stop at a certain point. They were extremely thrifty and filled with probing intent. Not only would they accurately investigate the truth, the most difficult part was that they would not make any mistakes. Wu Shuangjiang stood on a lotus leaf as big as a city. The small world of constellations had lost a small part of its territory, but the big formation's hub was still intact. However, the peach tree kite had been worn out, and the Osmanthus tree bright moon was gradually dimming. Most of the lotus leaves had been used to block the sword formation, and then they were crushed by the flying swords one by one. In the sky, the golden writings of the sages of the past, the 5 mountains stood tall, and the mountain-searching maps had occupied most of the sky. Wu Shuangjiang was not worried about this. The other party was still too wishful thinking to want to exhaust his spiritual energy or use all his magic weapons with just a sword formation and a lawless place. Wu Shuangjiang stretched out his hand and took back the tie by imitation sword from the back of the green-robed swordsman. He weighed it. The sword's will was still too light. This time, when he sparred with those people, each took what they needed and gave them something unexpected. Kui Dongshan and the others accumulated the small world. Wu Shuangjiang took this opportunity to perfect the sword's will of the 2 imitation swords, Naive and Tai Bai. As long as he could gain a little bit of benefit, it would be an immeasurable huge benefit. Bai was also not a sword cultivator. How was Bai's swordsmanship? The Battle of the Fuyao continent and the Battle of the Aquarius continent had already been seen by the cultivators at the peak of the mountain as the two turning points of the battle. Although Wu Shuangjiang was in deep trouble, with a sword formation that was majestic and filled with killing intent, he still split two of his attention to tour the two caves in his small world. He used the steely rubbing technique on the mountain to imitate two scrolls, which were Kui Dongshan's constellation map and Jiang Shangzhen's mountain searching map. The scrolls were fixed at a certain moment, as if the river of time had stopped. Wu Shuangjiang's attention wandered through them. The first scroll was fixed at the moment when Kui Dongshan appeared in the south. Beneath his feet was the Zhen mansion. He had just used his finger to draw a talisman and wrote the words eliminating the palace at the end of the year, Wu Shuangjiang. After that, the black-robed divinity and the 5 yellow-robed divinities each held a word in their hands. Wu Shuangjiang came to the heavenly patrol carriage and stood beside a yellow-robed heavenly official. Looking at the ancient Shuang word in her hand, Wu Shuangjiang fell into deep thought. His mind turned quickly. Was the white-robed young man trying to do something to his fate? Since Zhen was the name of the constellation, the word Shuo Wenjie also contained the meaning of grief. In the chapter of Xian Ku, there was also the saying repeat the order, Zhen the way. Kui Dongshan certainly did not choose the Zhen constellation as the place to appear randomly. However, he wanted to rely on the heavenly time and fate to connect with fate to destroy the fate of a 14th realm cultivator. Wasn't that too much of an ant trying to shake a tree? Embroidered tiger Kui Dong was calculating and would not be so shallow. Wu Shuangjiang pondered for a moment. The figure formed by his mustard seed mind suddenly fell tens of millions of li and stood where Kui Dongshan was previously standing. Wu Shuangjiang raised his head and looked. According to the astronomical and geographical differences, below his feet was the boundary of the 2 stars of the Bull Dipper. The neighboring constellation in the sky was the 2 stars of the winged Zhen mansion. Wu Shuangjiang stood in the distance and did not move for a long time. He seemed to have some clues, but it was extremely difficult to pick up the thread. In the other cave, Wu Shuangjiang's other mustard seed mind was standing beside the giant spirit emissary who stood on the mountain and held the demon sealing mirror. After the picture scroll froze, the mirror light was like a flying sword, forming a solidified white rainbow in the air. After Wu Shuangjiang copied the long-lost demon sealing mirror, his gaze shifted and moved to the side of the woman with the colorful ribbon with 4 faces. He stood on a ribbon as large as a stream and looked down at the mountains and rivers. 4 cultivators in their realm, breaking mountains and rivers with their fists, overturning rivers and seas, and using magic weapons to attack and cover the sky were all small tricks. An ordinary Qi cultivator in the immortal realm or a pure martial artist in the 9th realm had no chance to make a move in this battle. Or it could be said that it was meaningless to make a move. Wu Shuangjiang frowned slightly. He flicked his sleeves lightly and removed most of the colors from the thousands of mountains. The painted scroll turned into a white sketch. After many flicks of his sleeves to change the colors of the mountains and rivers, only a few mountains with firm roots were left. Wu Shuangjiang took a closer look and found that Jiang Shangzhen had indeed secretly done something to them. He removed many traces, leaving only the mountains themselves. At the same time, he refined the mountains into seals, just like a few plain seals that had not been engraved with words. Wu Shuangjiang sneered and flipped his palm, turning the mountains upside down. What a guy! 2 of the mountains had faint traces and were not engraved on the cliff. They were very insidious. Not only were the words as small as a fly's head, but there was also a layer of camouflage restriction. After being erased by Wu Shuangjiang, the truth was revealed. Wu Shuangjiang removed the painting scroll of the mountain search formation. He grabbed with both hands and held the 2 mountains in the palm of his hand like 2 pocket-sized stones. He then merged with the constellation map and waved his sleeves to disperse the extra constellations. He moved the mountains and released the mountains again. With a light wave, the pocket-sized mountains in his hand stood upright in the constellation map. Wu Shuangjiang then raised his hand and conjured a river and 2 pavilions. When Wu Shuangjiang used his finger as a pen and wrote the two plaques, the nearby mountains and rivers seemed to have been given a finishing touch by an immortal. They immediately came to life. For a moment, the sunset was lonely and the autumn water stretched into the sky. The scenery was pleasant. Not only that, Wu Shuangjiang's mind moved. Finally, a majestic pavilion with green glazed tiles was erected on the banks of the river. The embroidered tiger was obviously imitating Susie's handwriting. He changed the words inscribed on the golden plaque into the words Stork Pavilion. Wu Shuangjiang took a step forward and came to the bottom of the stairs of the pavilion. He looked up and saw a man with a vague appearance. He seemed to be the prince in the pavilion mentioned in the book. The constellation map in the sky and the mountain search formation on the ground. So this is a tripartite formation where heaven, earth, and man gather. As expected, the commotion caused by this was not as simple as the overlapping of heaven and earth. Instead, it was because the three small heaven and earth had hidden the formation eyes embedded in each other at certain key positions. Wu Shuangjiang smiled knowingly. This formation was not ordinary. The most interesting part was that the person who made up heaven, earth, and man was actually himself. He almost fell into the trap. It was dark under the light. Once those three people followed this path and used endless methods as a smokescreen to ceaselessly accumulate a bit of advantage, perhaps Wu Shuangjiang would really be like a ghost going around in circles, skinned alive, and had a great deal of his cultivation depleted. No wonder the water dragon hidden in the mirror light was disguised as a strand of Jiang Shangzhen's sword light. Unfortunately, Wu Shuangjiang failed when he tried to bite through the robe after noticing the anomaly. Otherwise, if it had absorbed even a drop of blood, the prince in the pavilion in the stork brothel would probably have a much clearer image, closer to the truth of Wu Shuangjiang himself. The three young people of the vast world were unscrupulous. They dared to think and dared to do. Half of the vast embroidered tiger, the leader of the Jade sect who turned the tide in the Tongyi continent, and the last reclusive official of the Great Wall of Sword Aura. They lived up to their reputation. One had to become famous as soon as possible and beat up others as soon as possible. On the path of cultivation, when seeing promising and pleasing juniors, the seniors should not be stingy with their saliva. They should quickly give a few pointers so that they would not have to worry about drinking in the future. It was true that Daoist son of the Xiandu temple liked to spout nonsense, but he did say a few words of advice. Wu Shuangjiang did not even walk into the pavilion without permission. Even if it was just an illusion of his state of mind, Wu Shuangjiang did not act rashly. Kui Dongshan did not really do anything. It was more Chen Pinggan and Jiang Shangzhen who did it. It turned out that they were secretly planning this. Putting away the mustard seed in his mind, Wu Shuangjiang turned his head to look. At the end of the distant sky, a thin golden line appeared. Wu Shuangjiang raised the Tai-Bai imitation sword in his hand and the lotus leaf under his feet tilted. A sword light arrived in the blink of an eye, directly splitting Wu Shuangjiang's entire constellation heaven and earth into two. Even the imitation sword in Wu Shuangjiang's hand was split apart. That sword light flashed by Wu Shuangjiang's side. His robes fluttered and there were actually slight sounds of silk being torn apart. Wu Shuangjiang shook his wrist and the Tai-Bai imitation sword in his hand was restored. It was Ning Yaro's sword. She swept her sword from extremely far away and sliced apart the small heaven and earth. Ning Yaro's second sword was a sword light from extremely far away. Within the constellation heaven and earth, it was a breathtaking sword chi galaxy. Wu Shuangjiang had expected this and barely dodged that extremely sharp sword light. However, the man and woman with swords on their backs were already blown apart by the sword light. Wu Shuangjiang changed his mind and temporarily kept the remnant aura of the two sword attendant puppets, Ning Yaro and Chen Pinggan, into his sleeves. He personally controlled the 4 imitation swords. Glancing at the Tai-Bai imitation sword, Wu Shuangjiang shook his head. He was still unable to condense that pure sword intent. In fact, Jiang Shangzhen had previously informed the mountain chieftain's wife that it was best not to use her sword, in case that fellow stole her sword intent. Ning Yaro only replied with one sentence, "Don't worry." Taking advantage of the moment when Wu Shuangjiang's constellation heaven and earth was about to collapse, Jiang Shangzhen appeared and patted Chen Pingan's shoulder. He said in a low voice, "Take care." Having a wife was of course a good thing. However, with such a wife, Chen Pingan could forget about drinking with her for the rest of his life. At the same time, Jiang Shangzhen said telepathically, "How is it? How far are you from the moon in Well?" Chen Pingan grinned. "There's still some distance. This fight could not be fought for nothing." Other than doing proper business, Chen Pingan, Kui Dongshan, and Jiang Shangzhen followed the routine. In fact, he was also using Wu Shuang's small world as a whetstone similar to the dragon-slaying platform to carefully sharpen the blade of the moon in the well. Jiang Shangzhen wanted to say something but stopped. Chen Pingan laughed. "How can there be no price to pay if you want to kill a 14th realm cultivator?" Two sword gleams flashed. Jiang Shangzhen and Chen Pingan disappeared from where they were at the same time. Unexpectedly, Chen Pingan discovered that he was followed by a talisman in the form of a jade drawing axe. The two imitation swords, Tai Bai and Wanfa, followed him like shadows. They should have been transformed from the giant axe of that Gui Ren from before. This talisman's killing power was average. However, its biggest problem was that it was haunting. Chen Pingan telepathically said to Jiang Shangzhen, "Do what you need to do. Don't worry about me. I'll test these two immortal swords." This was a rare opportunity. He could also temper his martial body at the same time. Whatever he could do to make up for it was better. Even if the three of them worked together to set up a trap, they had already considered the severity of the consequences on Luorpa Mountain. The price they had to pay could be that Chen Pingan lost a certain intrinsic flying sword, or the caged sparrow, or the moon in Well. It could be that one of Jiang Shangzhen's willow leaves caused the quality of his flying sword to drop. It could be that Kui Dongshan lost the skin of an immortal realm cultivator. Or even more. For example, Chen Pingan's martial limit could cause a drop in cultivation level. Or perhaps, someone had to pay an even greater price. On Luorpa Mountain, Chen Pingan finally set a rule. No matter who was saved by the other two, that person had to be aware that even if the three of them worked together, they were destined to be unable to change the greatest outcome. Then, that person would have to exchange their life with a mortal enemy like Pei Minute to ensure that the other two's great Dao cultivation would not be completely severed. Kui Dongshan and Jiang Shangzhen had no objections to this at the time. Wu Shuangjiang had one hand behind his back. Two fingers on one hand seemed to be plucking the strings of a zither. A stringless sound resounded between heaven and earth. Behind him was a celestial avatar. It was like a yin spirit had left its body and traveled far away. It held the two imitation swords of the Daoist scripture and heavenly innocence. Chen Pingan, who had just dodged the two sword flashes of Grand White and Myriad Arts, was struck by a bolt of lightning without warning. In the next moment, Chen Pingan gripped the tips of the two imitation swords with both hands and slid back thousands of feet. Sword flashes bloomed, and his hands were mangled. Sword chi surged, and his entire face was lacerated with fine sword scars. He had no choice but to squint, not daring to look directly at the sword flashes. Chen Pingan's retreating momentum did not slow down at all. The sword tip slowly stabbed out of his palm. Wu Shuangjiang rose again and plucked the stringless and formless zither. This kid really knows how to hide. With this martial physique, why would he need to show off his unpolished jade avatar? While gripping the tips of the two imitation swords tightly, he could only let the heavenly thunder strike his body caused by the stringless sound. Wu Shuangjiang bent two fingers and plucked a string. He gently loosened his fingers. Chen Pingan felt like he was swept in the abdomen by a rod. His whole body had no choice but to bend. His hands slid forward, and the tips of the two imitation swords were already in front of his eyes. After all, a 14th level avatar of oneness of heaven and men was not holding a real celestial sword. Compared to the Ascendant Realm Sword cultivator Ning Yaro's Q-sword, he was already at a disadvantage. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and said, "Bloom." The celestial avatar behind him instantly changed into thousands of illusions. They hovered in various places, each holding a pair of swords. A Q-sword battle. The sword aura was like a waterfall, surging and pouring towards Ning Yaro, who was alone with one sword. Wu Shuangjiang made a gesture with one hand. In fact, he was constantly calculating in his mind. Suddenly, Wu Shuangjiang accidentally broke a string. Wu Shuangjiang raised his hand, and a drop of blood seeped out of his finger. Wu Shuangjiang's expression became serious. However, his heartstrings were greatly shaken. Even with Wu Shuangjiang's divination skills, he still could not find any traces. The young man in white, who had been watching from the sidelines, was squatting in an attic. He did not really fight with Wu Shuangjiang, but he was in a worse state than Chen Pinggan and Jiang Shangzhen. He was bleeding from his 7 orifices and cursing. In front of him stood a porcelain figure named Wu Shuangjiang. Kui Dongshan had carefully set up a formation around the figure, creating a formation with excellent feng shui that could not be better. Kui Dongshan had created a formation with excellent feng shui, which could not be better. The art of the dragon, the orientation of the 3 mountains, the water of the coming and going back to the hall, the heavenly stars and earthly trigram, the 48 divisions of Shun-En-I Shan, the Buddhism's 6 realms, the Taoists' grand ritual of the universe, and the 244 divisions of the 5 elements, just a constellation map, mountain searching formation, and Wu Shuangjiang's heaven, earth, and man triad formation? What a joke! You, Wu Shuangjiang, are underestimating your own 14th level. You are also underestimating the brains of Master Kui, my teacher, and Chief Ju. Previously, Kui Dongshan and Jiang Shangzhen still needed magic treasures to fall like rain outside the caged sparrow and willow shade. What were they trying to achieve? Superimposing the 5 elements formation on top of the triad formation, and then superimposing the 7 stars formation on top of the 5 elements formation. The triad formation that was relatively easy to detect was both a smokescreen and not a smokescreen. Metal of the 5 elements, Chen Ping'an's caged sparrow. Water, Kui Dongshan's ancient shoe's great swamp. Wood, Jiang Shangzhen's willow shade. Fire, Kui Dongshan personally set up a large group of volcanoes. The formation was called Laojuan's pill refining furnace. Earth, moon in the well and Jiang Shangzhen's willow leaf were used as concealment techniques for the 5 great mountains' true form map. The triad formation, 5 elements, and 7 stars overlapped. In addition to the 2 concealment formations that assisted Bai's double concealment, it was a complete 7 appearances double concealment outside of the 7 stars. Death of the Big Dipper. The crux of this was the porcelain figure that Kui Dongshan had risked his life to create, Wu Shuangjiang. Kui Dongshan did not care about the bloodstains on his face. His 5 fingers were like hooks as he pressed down on the head of the porcelain figure, Wu Shuangjiang. Break it to pieces. Kui Dongshan pressed down on the head tightly. Bit by bit, signs of the great Tao collapsing appeared. Kui Dongshan's ancient shoe flood dragon immortal shed skin actually started to crack. When the porcelain figure suddenly broke apart, Kui Dongshan flew out and fell to the ground in a pool of blood. At the same time, the many small worlds overlapped and merged into one. The 4 immortal swords and the celestial figure were all forced to return to Wu Shuangjiang's side. This was the true grinding ant of the great Tao, crushing a realm 14. All the small worlds, including Wu Shuangjiang, were as small as a mustard seed. Chen Pinggan was wearing a bright red Daoist robe. He had the physique of a realm 10 martial artist that carried the true names of countless great demons. His body was completely bent. When he no longer intentionally straightened his spine, he finally fully revealed his realm 10 Qi flourishing realm for the first time after returning home from the Great Wall of Sword Qi. He extended his hand to hold his sword and roamed the night. Let me go first. He used the sword that split open the Sui mountain when he was young and added the god's drumming stance. He would deliver as many swords as he could. He turned into a rainbow and left. The elegance of a sword immortal. Jiang Shangzhen and Ning Yarrow stood on opposite sides. An immortal realm sword cultivator in a long green robe and cloth shoes had a complete willow leaf hovering in front of him. Like a whale swallowing, he completely absorbed Jiang Shangzhen's spiritual qi. He did not hesitate to drain the pond to catch fish. He did not hesitate to let his intrinsic flying sword drop in realm and even break it. Ning Yarrow held her sword in the air. She extended a finger and pressed it between her eyebrows. She gently wiped it. The immortal sword in her hand was innocent. It was only at this moment that she truly reached the peak of the sword realm. Chen Ping'an's 21 swords combined into one. He slashed the realm 14 Wu Shuangjiang's true body and celestial figure. Jiang Shangzhen's flying sword chopped off the yin god's head. Ning Yaro's sword destroyed Wu Shuangjiang's soul. 780. Wu Shuangjiang raised the quaint teacup in his hand and took a sip of tea. He looked at Chen Ping'an and said with a smile, "Master Hidden Official, please name your price." "Let's hear it first. Don't worry that I'll think that you're asking for too much. My Dao partner and I are like two lives. No matter how high the price, it won't be excessive." Kui Dongshan sneered, "Buying and selling by force is not the style of an expert, is it?" Wu Shuangjiang nodded, "There is such a suspicion. But it involves my life, so I cannot be particular about the bearing of an immortal." Jiang Shangzhen sighed, "How frank. Old Immortal Wu is a 14th level great cultivator after all. His words are consistent with his actions." Wu Shuangjiang smiled, "I have already been killed by you guys once. It is not a big problem to take a few more strange words." Jiang Shangzhen was so angry that he wanted to stand up and reason with Kui Dongshan, but Kui Dongshan pressed down on his shoulders and pushed him back. He complained, well, we can't beat him. Save your strength. If we can't reach an agreement later, the important task of kowtowing to old Immortal Wu and begging for mercy will be handed over to you, the chief consecrator." After Chen Ping'an sat down, he took out a porcelain bottle and applied the secret ointment of the Yang medicine shop to his hands. He wrapped them skillfully and took out a few talismans. Finally, he covered his sleeves with his hands and said, "Senior, please look through the ancient records. After listening, I will make a decision." Wu Shuangjiang looked at the calm young man and asked with a smile, "How did you make that last move?" If it had been Ning Yaro who had struck out with that sword, Wu Shuangjiang wouldn't have found it strange. But a sword cultivator at the unpolished Jade Realm, holding a sword that was only half an immortal sword, was actually able to directly cut apart his true body and celestial avatar. Chen Ping'an said, "It is not a superior sword move. I just jumped forward and slashed with my sword. But the method of operation is from the Great Wall of Sword Chi's 18 stops sword chi. I also added some fist techniques to it. It is called the deity drum beating style." In front of Wu Shuangjiang, who would learn whatever he wanted, there was no point in deliberately hiding anything. Since that was the case, he might as well be frank. Wu Shuangjiang nodded with a smile. He raised his hand and put two fingers together. With a gentle swipe, 18 mustard seed sword chi appeared on the table. They were not straight lines, but hovered in the air, perfectly fitting the 18 chi residences of the small worlds of the human body. They connected with each other and formed a line. The sword light bloomed slightly. The table was like the earth, and the sword chi was like the stars. It was as if Wu Shuangjiang had created a pocket-sized galaxy out of thin air. Wu Shuangjiang suddenly clenched his other hand into a fist and slowly pushed it out. He shook his head, as if he was not satisfied. He changed the trajectory of his fist several times and finally threw out a punch. Wu Shuangjiang twisted his wrist and put the picture scroll that was both a sword and fist technique into his sleeve. He did not hide his admiration at all and nodded with a smile. "It is a good punch. Unfortunately, I am not a pure martial artist. I cannot learn it completely. I am missing a fundamental divine decree." Wu Shuangjiang thought for a moment and pulled out a green talisman from his sleeve. He pushed it lightly and it floated toward Chen Ping'an. "Take it as a small compensation for your removal." Chen Ping'an shook his head and said, "I do not deserve it. Senior, you have stolen the sword and fist techniques with your own ability. I will accept it." Wu Shuangjiang smiled. This is a Tai Ching light body talisman, also known as the lifting sun talisman. It is also called the corpse dissolving talisman by Daoist Qing Ming. It is my proudest work, born from the Taishen clear life talisman personally made by the Daoist ancestor. Compared to the Moon Palace Jade Axe talisman, it is worthy of being called a great talisman. Chen Ping'an was indifferent when he heard this, and he still declined. If this lifting body talisman was the final deal today, Chen Pinggan would accept it without hesitation even if Wu Shuangjiang gave him a whole stack of talismans, let alone one. However, Wu Shuangjiang's temperament was hard to fathom. Tian Xiao wouldn't fall out with him on a whim. If Wu Shuangjiang tampered with a talisman and then generously accepted it, what else could it be but courting death? Seeing that the young hidden official didn't know how to appreciate his kindness, Wu Shuangjiang wasn't angry, but he also didn't take back the green seal root material talisman. It gently floated down on the table in front of Chen Pinggan. Kui Dongshan stood behind Jiang Shangzhen and stood on tiptoe. He stared hard at the precious talisman on the table. The art of talisman drawing could be stolen, but talisman paper could not be replaced. This was because the material of the talisman paper was extremely good and expensive. Not only was it priceless, it was mainly because there was no market for it. In the green underworld, it was used by the immortals of the 5 cities and 12 floors of the Beko Keikyang building to invite the gods to descend. Wu Shuangjiang turned his head to look at the Jade Gui sect's old sect leader with snow-white hair. He laughed heartily and said, "You and I can be considered kindred spirits." The woman that both sides admired was not some exceptional beauty among the women on the mountain. For cultivators like them, what kind of beauty could they not have? Jiang Shangzhen raised his hand and cupped his fist. He shook it lightly and said with a mischievous smile, "You flatter me." The seating arrangement of the 5 people in the room was also very interesting. Wu Shuangjiang's back was facing the door. The wine table was facing the door. Among Chen Pinggan's group, after Wu Shuangjiang entered the room and took a seat first, Chen Pinggan sat on the bench to Wu Shuangjiang's left. Although his realm was the lowest and he was also heavily injured, second only to Kui Dongshan whose body had collapsed, he still sat on the bench to Wu Shuangjiang's left. Therefore, his position was closest to Wu Shuangjiang. Ning Yarrow, like a protector, chose to sit beside Chen Pinggan. Jiang Shangzhen rushed to sit on Wu Shuangjiang's right. In this way, the seat opposite Wu Shuangjiang was given to the most heavily injured white-clothed youth, who was the furthest away from Wu Shuangjiang. However, Kui Dongshan did not sit. Instead, he stood behind Jiang Shangzhen. Except for Wu Shuangjiang, this outsider. The 4 people at the table in the room were actually all thinking for the others. The atmosphere in Luopa Mountain was good. Between a pair of young immortal Daoist companions, between a teacher and a student, between a sect leader and a consecrator, without exception, life and death could be entrusted to them. It was only natural for them to be by the side of these people. This was also why when Wu Shuangjiang appeared, he did not hide his killing intent at all. He did not have the slightest intention to sit down and discuss. It was to verify one thing. How much importance did Chen Pinggan place on a business deal and a promise? How much was Chen Pinggan willing to pay to fulfill the promise? What is the rarest thing on a wine table? Wu Shuangjiang asked and answered his own question. A table of wine guests, nothing is an eyesore. Chen Pinggan was just about to speak when Wu Shuangjiang raised his chin towards the door. "You can leave first. Let your disciple and that little water monster feel at ease. Then, we can talk about business. Otherwise, it will be difficult for you to truly feel at ease." Chen Pinggan nodded. He went to Ning Yarrow's room and told Pei Qian that everything was fine. However, he did not want Pei Qian to be in a hurry to wake up little Millet who was sleeping soundly. Realizing that Pei Qian was still worried, Chen Pinggan bent his fingers and tapped them on the chestnut. Pei Qian smiled and sat back down. He rubbed little Millet's head. Chen Pinggan's footsteps were slow. He walked in the corridor. The white-haired boy with the real name Tianran was nowhere to be found. He must have been hidden by Wu Shuangjiang. Wu Shuangjiang smiled. He was very clear about this. He turned to Jiang Shangzhen and said, "No wonder you were willing to spend so much. Your gambling skills and luck are so good that there is no end to them." Jiang Shangzhen was holding a bottle of moonlight wine brewed in his family's cloud cave blessed land. He raised his head and drank. He wiped the corner of his mouth and smiled. "Old immortal Wu's realm is high. Whatever he says is right." When Chen Pinggan returned to his seat, Wu Shuangjiang knocked the teacup in his hand on the table. The 3 words at the bottom of the teacup turned into golden light and spread out on the table. In an instant, Chen Pinggan and the rest were on the top floor of a stalk tower. There were only 4 pillars supporting the roof of the casoon. There were no windows or doors to obstruct their vision. In front of Chen Pinggan, the green talisman was still hovering. Jiang Shangzhen was leaning against the railing. He held the wine bottle with 2 fingers and shook it gently. The moonlight and the smell of wine were released together and dissipated into the air. Kui Dongshan leaped over and stood on the railing. His 2 snow-white sleeves were blown by the wind and fluttered slowly. Wu Shuangjiang slowly walked to the other side of the white jade railing. Under the eaves, there was a string of horses. When the wind blew, they jingled and swayed with golden light. If one listened carefully, it was actually the singing of a woman. Wu Shuangjiang kept the teacup and put his hands behind his back. He looked into the distance and pointed at a mountain. There were pavilions, towers, palaces, and temples. They were built in rows along the mountain. From the foot of the mountain to the peak of the mountain, there are a total of 108 mansions. When I reached the Immortals' Cave realm, I had an idea. If I were to be the palace master of the Lunar Palace in the future, there would be 108 direct disciples of the Hall of Patriarchs. The direct disciples would be recruited and transferred, and each of them would occupy one of the mansions. Their realms would not be low and their Dao skills were not ordinary. It's a pity that it hasn't been done yet. Mansions are easy to build, but people are hard to find. Money is easy to earn, but people's hearts are like flowing water. Many sect cultivators with excellent aptitudes couldn't control their thoughts and complained about this and that. It's either the mansions are too small or their positions are too low. Therefore, they all became passers-by. Wu Shuangjiang laughed. The Lunar Palace was said to be a den for young people, so I kindly accepted it. I can use it to remind the cultivators of the Lunar Palace that young people's spirit is the most precious. Don't be worn down by the ways of the world. He had been too diligent in his cultivation and did not dare to slack off at all. Therefore, he often owed reading debts. Occasionally, when there was nothing to do on the mountain, he would burn incense and read Yushi poems. Every time before Wu Shuangjiang went down the mountain to kill someone, he would read Suzy Ci to liven things up. Chen Pinggan suddenly asked, "What is the real name of the shopkeeper of the Crane Inn on the inverted mountain?" Wu Shuangjiang said, "I won't mention his real name. Otherwise, Little White will be unhappy. As for the golden jade certificate of my Lunar Palace master, his name is Bai Luo. The word Luo as in rise and fall." Chen Pinggan's heart was shaken. He lowered his voice and asked a seemingly redundant question, "The word rise and fall as in rise and fall?" Wu Shuangjiang smiled and nodded. "Little White is actually also on the night boat. However, he is not in the city. He has been wandering around the Arch City. He is most likely looking for trouble with the long-faced man. Therefore, it was a very wise choice for you to reject Little White's suggestion. Otherwise, the Ascension City and the Fifth World would have gone to war. For the sword cultivators of the Ascension City, it might not be a bad thing. They might even be able to fight against the forces of the 3 sects with the power of a single city within 100 years. It's just that in this way, the long-term plans of the Summer Palace that have been steadily, a great undertaking that has helped the Ascension City stand tall, I'm afraid that it will fall short of success." Chen Pinggan was speechless. He could not help but take out a pot of wine in front of Ning Yao. He drank a mouthful of wine to calm himself down. At that time, when he rejected the innkeeper's business, Chen Pinggan did not think too much about it. He simply did not want the Ascension City to cause any trouble. Risks were opportunities, and opportunities were also risks. This logic could not be any simpler. Chen Pinggan did not trust a young innkeeper who had been hiding in the inverted hanging mountain for hundreds of years. He was also the guardian of the palace. He did not know anything about him. Ning Yao had some guesses, but she was not sure. She looked at Chen Pinggan and asked. Chen Pinggan nodded and said helplessly, "It's that person." He casually flipped through his memory. The past was still vivid in his mind. There was a small inn at the end of a small alley in the inverted hanging mountain. Chen Pinggan clearly remembered that every time he went there, He saw the young man standing behind the counter. He seemed to be lazy, and every time the young innkeeper talked to Chen Pinggan, he would be full of smiles. He was very amiable. Wu Shuangjiang hit the nail on the head. Actually, Little White liked you very much back then, so she helped you cover up your martial arts qi. The two of them overlapped, and that's why you scared the Oriole back at Huangliang Blessed Land. Don't worry, there was no scheme behind this. It was just that Xiao Bai felt that he could not find the person he was looking for and could not earn much money. His life was too boring. Later on, when you became a hidden official, Xiao Bai was very pleased. He said that he had a good eye for people. Chen Pinggan drank another mouthful of wine. Lady Gui let him stay in the sparrow stalk in back then? Did she notice it long ago? In the vast world, there was a martial temple in the ancestral court of the Central Plains Military School, and the 10 philosophers of the martial temple were worshipped. However, even the scholars of the later generations had many criticisms about this. There were objections about the person who was the assistant worshipper, and there were even more objections about at least half of the 10 philosophers of the martial temple. They felt that they should not have been chosen at all. As for the martial temple worshippers who were added later on, there were 72 famous generals. They were divided into 10 people in the main hall and 62 people on the two sides of the veranda to enjoy the incense together. Many people of the later generations did not agree with this, and they all had their own opinions. In particular, during this period, there was a case where the Confucian sages in the Confucian temple in the Central Plains kept suggesting that they should select those with flawless achievements. As a result, many famous generals who had many achievements but killed too many people were either demoted or removed from their positions as gods. This caused one of the 10 philosophers of the martial temple to be moved out of the main hall to one of the two veranda. Originally, this person was going to lose the right to be worshipped on the two veranda. In the end, it was rumored that 2 people in the Confucian temple made a scene and rejected this suggestion. They came to a compromise and moved out of the main hall. However, they stayed on the two veranda and were only ranked 4th. This still made the military cultivators of the later generations feel that it was unfair. They said that the so-called famous generals selected by the Confucian temple were too many strategists. They could only be considered as advisors, but they were nothing special. Among the 72 people, at least half of them were not even qualified to carry that person's boots. As for the remaining half were not even qualified to lead that person's horse. The remaining half were too ashamed to be ranked among the 10 philosophers of the martial temple with that person. What shopkeeper of the Sparrow Stalk Inn? What guardian of the year? What Xiao Bai of the Qingming world? What Bai Luo? It was Bai Qi. As for how this person went to the Qingming world and how he became Wu Shuangjiang's right-hand man, only God knew. Chen Pinggan did not even want to ask. Wu Shuangjiang said, "Many people are trapped in their own cocoons. They have no choice." This was the conclusion of the previous battle. The mini-worlds stacked on top of each other. It was not only to kill Wu Shuangjiang, but also to allow Wu Shuangjiang to unleash his 14th tier cultivation base. He did not have to worry about his Dao-fusing aura being sensed by the Confucian temple. Wu Shuangjiang continued, "All of you should be very clear that the reason I didn't choose to take you down with me in the end wasn't because I didn't have the strength to retaliate. Otherwise, apart from Ning Yao, the 3 of you would have succeeded in killing me, but the damage to your great Dao would have been far greater." Chen Pinggan said, "Far greater than this?" Putting aside the fact that the tip of the Grand White Sword was almost detached from the body of the Night Swimming Sword, it would take a lot of time to reforge it. Chen Pinggan might even have to invest a mountain of gold and silver. Putting aside the fact that Chen Pinggan was injured, the mountains and rivers in the mini-worlds were shaken. The number of times that Chen Pinggan needed to use the ointment from the Yang clan's medicine shop after the battle could be counted with one's fingers. Putting these aside, Jiang Shangzhen's flying sword's rank had dropped. Kui Dongshan did not even have the skin of an immortal's remains. Although he looked calm, he was actually severely injured. If it was not for Kui Dongshan's mystical spells, an ordinary immortal qi cultivator would have been half dead. He might not even be able to maintain the upper 5 states. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and said, "Don't worry about these. I know what's important." If Kui Dongshan could not get rid of the shackles of this skin, how could he ascend to the ascendant state? Wu Shuangjiang dared to assert that as half a tiger in white, he had been looking for a sword cultivator all these years. The sword cultivator must be at least at the ascendant state and must be trustworthy with excellent swordsmanship. For example, Alliance, who had a close relationship with the sage of literature, the left and right of the same sect. Only then could he rest assured and let the other party break the cage with his sword. As for the flying sword with a section of willow leaf, of course, the loss was great. However, as long as Jiang Shangzhen ascended to the ascendant state, the two problems would be solved easily. It was just that these things that he knew were more unpleasant to say out loud. Wu Shuangjiang did not feel that he needed to pay back the money when doing business with these young people. Moreover, the four of them worked together. One of them shaped porcelain figurines and shattered porcelain figurines, and the three of them worked together to kill 14 states. Such a magnificent feat, even if Wu Shuangjiang was the one who was killed, he felt that it was very interesting. It would make Wu Shuangjiang look forward to the scene 100 years later. He just did not know that 100 or 1,000 years later, the young people would have ascended to the ascendant state. Then, there would be 4 ascendants and 3 of them would be sword cultivators. Would someone in the future mention this matter and say such a thing? There was once a person named Wu Shuangjiang in the New Year's Palace. He fought against Chen Pinggan, Ning Yaro, Jiang Shangzhen, and Kui Dongshan alone? How strong! Wu Shuangjiang laughed and took out a pot of wine as an exception. He drank a mouthful and began to talk about some old stories. After the New Year's Palace had me, it was very different. In less than 100 years, it rose quickly. You should know that when I was in the Jindan realm, I was already a sect's accountant and the god of wealth. When I ascended to the nascent soul realm, I also took the position of the head of justice. Of course, this had a lot to do with the fact that the New Year's Palace was only a second-rate mountain at that time. However, you should have flipped through the secret records. A Jindan talisman cultivator killed a nascent soul sword cultivator in the process of catching and killing 2 Jade Realm cultivators when he was in the nascent soul realm. I'm not boasting, but not everyone can do it. I'm cautious by nature. Some accidents on the path of cultivation may seem dangerous, but in fact, they are nothing. However, this does not mean that the people around me are the same. So, there was a woman who accidentally killed 2 Qi cultivators when she went down the mountain to gain experience. Both of them were officials of the secular imperial court. In the process of killing, more than 10 innocent mortals were harmed. This debt was counted as her fault. This is actually not too much to ask. So, I had to go down the mountain and help her deal with all kinds of people. Originally, all aspects had been settled by me. I followed the clues and found the person behind the scenes. That woman was Wu Shuangjiang's Dao companion on the mountain. In the New Year's Palace, she was a woman with very ordinary cultivation aptitude and appearance. It was a trap set up by a cultivator on the mountain. Of course, it was targeted at Wu Shuangjiang. A woman with ordinary appearance and cultivation aptitude was not too good, was not worthy of the person behind the scenes to mobilize so many people. In the end, Wu Shuangjiang provoked the second sect master of the Beko Keikyang building. He was really invincible, you do. Even those who set up the trap behind the scenes felt that it was a great surprise. At that time, Wu Shuangjiang was only a nascent soul realm cultivator. In the end, the second sect master of the Beko Keikyang building, who had been in charge of the Beko Keikyang building for 100 years, gave Wu Shuangjiang a choice. Otherwise, he would hand over that woman. According to the law of Dao, his soul would scatter. Wu Shuangjiang, you only need to stand by and watch. You don't need to die. Wu Shuangjiang suddenly brought up an off-topic topic. Our third sect master had nothing to do, so he also set up a similar heart-questioning trap for his junior brother. However, in terms of the details of the Dao heart, his senior brother was never satisfied. Otherwise, that youth could have obtained an immortal fate at that time. He could have reached the heavens in a single step and entered the jade unpolished realm. If he could not be sloppy in his state of mind and surpass you by a level, then do the same thing as you and seem to be looking for trouble and doing something superfluous, Lu Chen would be willing to look at him more highly. Chen Pinggan said, "Is it that person whose Dao name is Shan Qing? He was also one of the 10 young people under the heavens." Wu Shuangjiang smiled as he picked up the wine pot and pointed at the woman beside Chen Pinggan. Ning Yaro only said casually at this moment, "This person's actions are not very honest. I cut him a few times with my sword and he hid in seclusion for a few years." Jiang Shangzhen, who had been listening attentively, immediately repeated the 2 words in a low voice. "Take care, take care." Wu Shuangjiang leaned against the railing and only took a sip before he stopped drinking. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the mountains and rivers in the distance. He smiled and said, "You have to know that before that incident, I was regarded as the Daoist cultivator who had the most Confucian sage aura in the world. I even had the hope of cultivating 1 or 2 natal characters because I firmly believe that everything in the world is clearly distinguished between right and wrong, black and white. The mountains and rivers were still there, but people were already passers-by. That was why Wu Shuangjiang said that sentence earlier. Everyone had a calligraphy lake in their heart. Perhaps, in Jiang Shangzhen's calligraphy lake, there would be a weak woman like Heng Wu, who would linger around year after year without leaving. Perhaps, the Hall of Ancestral Masters on the Divine Seal Peak, which used to be noisy, would become empty. There would be no more cursing and no one would throw a chair. Perhaps, in the calligraphy lake in Kui Dongshan's heart, there would be a poor teacher who had a belly full of knowledge but was still hungry. He would take the young man he met for the first time to walk through the shabby streets where chickens were chirping and dogs were barking. Perhaps, in the old school, there would be a high-spirited young scholar who was teaching on behalf of his teacher a moment ago. In the blink of an eye, the few people who were listening to the lesson had gone far away and never looked back. Perhaps, in the ancestral house of the Cow family in the Mud Bottle Alley, an old sword immortal from the South Sura continent who returned from a long journey looked back and seemed to see a woman with a broom in her hand. On that rainy day at home, the small courtyard where the 4 rivers converged into the hall was a calligraphy lake. Even an old sword immortal who had lived for thousands of years and had a heart of stone would have blurred vision when he looked back. He would murmur softly, "Mother, silly mother." A calligraphy lake might just be an inconspicuous rural mass grave. There was once a lively and cute little girl who was a ghost but was most afraid of ghosts. After she completely left the human world, she could make a swordsman who revisited the old place not so sad that he would be heartbroken. He just sat alone for a night and dared not to drink. Perhaps, it was a lonely accountant who washed his face by the lake with water. Perhaps, it was a young man who said that he was too young at a wine table on a long journey. Perhaps, it was a woman who traveled with the city and was like the moon in the sky. Her face was full of tears. Looking at her lover who had lost his face and body on the city wall, she seemed to still have a smile on her face and waved goodbye to her. She wanted the woman who had a higher realm and better swordsmanship not to worry and not to feel guilty. The first floor was silent. Everyone had their own thoughts. The 2 sides who were confronting each other seemed to have changed from a life and death battle to a jovial conversation. They even had the hope of making a deal and forming an alliance. However, in fact, they were still at daggers drawn and the undercurrent was surging. Both sides would continue to fight to the death at any time. There was no need for any disagreements or angry glares to kill each other. Wu Shuangjiang collected some of his thoughts and pointed at the green talisman. He said to Chen Pinggan, "My 14th realm Dao fusing avatar, as long as my Dao partner and I are not killed at the same time, neither of us will die. As for how much Dao was damaged and how to recover my realm, it is too involved with the foundation of Dao. I won't tell you clearly. As for today's battle, I will compensate all of you for your losses. For example, this corpse-dissolving talisman can not only turn an earth immortal who has no hope of reaching the 5 realms into a ghost immortal but also enter the jade unpolished realm. In the future, you can shape your golden body and become the spirit of mountains and rivers. You can change your path and continue to ascend. Moreover, the value of this talisman lies in the material of the talisman paper. This is the compensation for your body's injury." Chen Pinggan waved his hand and put the talisman into his sleeve. Wu Shuangjiang continued, "The reason why Jiang Shangzhen and Mr. Kui can suddenly appear is because you used the 3 mountains talisman. There is no problem with the talisman drawing technique. Unfortunately, the material of the talisman is too poor and can't carry too much Dao meaning. Therefore, the benefits of the 3 mountains travel to the distant lands are too small for the 3 of you. Wu Shuangjiang took out 4 falling truth green talismans that were rare even in the Beko Keikyang building. He waved his sleeve gently and threw them to Jiang Shangzhen and Kui Dongshan. In the vast world, all the sects under the Beko Keikyang building, such as the Divine Grandeur sect of the Aquarius continent and the Taiping Mountain of the Tongya continent, would burn this talisman every time someone ascended to the Heavenly Lord realm and invited the 3 sect masters that they respected. The value of this talisman was obvious. Wu Shuangjiang glanced at Chen Pingan's face and smiled, "That's all." Chen Pingan chuckled. "Who are you kidding? There were not many 14th level cultivators who were so stingy. I really only have these 5 talismans on me. However, there are still 3 in the sect master hall. Why don't you come with me to get them?" Wu Shuangjiang smiled and saw through Chen Pingan's thoughts. He joked, "Anyway, you and Daoist Sun are friends despite the difference in age. Perhaps the 3rd sect master of the Beko Keikyang building will see you and want to catch up with you. In the early years, when you traveled to the Xuanju temple, he nagged you a lot. With these 2 friends, not to mention my old palace, where can't I roam around the world?" Chen Pingan asked, "Is Daoist Sun doing well?" Wu Shuangjiang nodded and said, "He's very lively." Wu Shuangjiang seemed to have thought of something. He shook his sleeves, and 2 more treasures appeared in an instant. A scabbard and the green bamboo cane, which was called Qi Travel Inscription, were thrown to Jiang Shangzhen and Kui Dongshan again. The scabbard was refined from the dragon beheading platform. The scabbard is also a talisman array. I have removed all 36 layers of restrictions. It can be used to nourish the willow leaf and improve the quality of the flying sword. If it can't be done, I will congratulate Sect Master Jiang in advance to the Ascendant Realm. I will give this Qi Travel Mountain cane to Mr. Kui as a meeting gift. Mr. Kui can figure out its various magical uses by himself." Kui Dongshan took the green bamboo cane and Jiang Shangzhen held the scabbard. The 2 of them looked at each other and smiled. If they had killed Wu Shuangjiang earlier, wouldn't the 2 of them have become rich? From then on, they would be so extravagant that they would be out of control. Wu Shuangjiang said to Ning Yarrow again, "After returning to my hometown, I will issue a decree to the inner disciples of the 5th world to let them serve the Ascendant City once, regardless of life and death." After all, it was the Youth Cave. Such an ally was one of a kind in the world. Ning Yarrow expressed her gratitude. Wu Shuangjiang said, "Tianran was your guest at the Great Wall of Sword Aura. She met 3 people in succession. The first one was the person who did business with me. If it were someone else, they wouldn't be able to take Tianran away. Even if they did, it would be too obvious. Therefore, when Tianran met him at the Great Wall of Sword Aura, he even said that he wanted to spar with her. Of course, she was scared half to death. She has always been timid." Chen Pingan nodded and said, "He is Daoist Sun's junior brother. The wood house of the 5 elements and the statue of the middle-aged Daoist were carved from an ancestral peach tree of the Da Xiandu temple. As for Chen Pingan's 5 peaks, they were made from the green bricks of the Da Xiandu temple. The Dao intent contained within was also the foundation of the Da Xiandu temple's sword immortal lineage. This middle-aged Daoist who looked like a tourist from afar was the junior brother of the Da Xiandu temple's master, Sun Huizhong. He was also the master of the unique man of all ages, Song Maolu. It seems that she also met a lethargic person. He wore straw sandals and carried a firewood knife. He had been walking around. Wu Shuangjiang suddenly conjured a horsetail whisk. The horsetail whisk drew a circle and then made a fist with one hand. He smiled and said, "Scripture seeking is just an empty straw sandal. I don't know what you are looking for." Chen Pingan was slightly surprised, but still said straightforwardly, "Isn't it just looking for a place to settle down? Besides, straw sandals are everywhere." Wu Shuangjiang passed the horsetail whisk to Chen Pingan and smiled, "In my hometown, I used to visit the supreme residence with Lu Chen. However, I only know a little about Buddhism. I hope that you will learn Zen wholeheartedly in the future. Don't run away from Zen." After Chen Pingan received the horsetail whisk, His shoulder tilted and he almost couldn't catch the fluttering horsetail whisk in Wu Shuangjiang's hand. Wu Shuangjiang suddenly asked, Buddha's 10 great disciples each have their own number 1. May I ask why Venerable Luo Huluo, who is the number 1 in secret travel, is number 1? Chen Pinggan didn't deliberately beat around the bush and answered honestly, when I first saw this Buddhist case in the book, I didn't know why. The monk answered, I don't know. After asking a monk on the cliff, I found out the answer. Since it was a secret travel, how could an outsider answer this question? Of course they didn't know. The theory in the book was explained and it seemed very simple. It's a pity that everyone has their own problems and it's too difficult to know one that you don't know. Wu Shuangjiang continued to ask, how is the seamless pagoda? How is the person in the pagoda? How is it beating the vines to go? How is it only going to the west? How is it seizing the realm? How is it seizing the person? Why is it that when the old monk roars, only the monks are shocked and they are the so-called handsome sons? Why are they singing horses? Why do they have to speak in a low voice? Why do they have to cover their mouths? Why do they have to clench their fists and raise their fingers? How is it different at the same time? How is it their original appearance? Why is there a chaos stabilizing sword when the staff is raised but no white swamp diagram when the staff is lowered? Moreover, how is it possible for a living person to use a sword and a living person's knife? Why is the first sentence of breaking the demands, officials do not tolerate needles, carriage and horse have illicit relations? What is the 3 mysteries and 3 demands? How do they break the tongues of all the monks in the world? How is it a matter of the upper class? Chen Pinggan sighed and answered honestly, it's all recorded in the book. If I just memorize and copy, I can give more than 300 answers to these questions. On the long journey, he read non-stop. Just the question of how is the patriarch's purpose in coming to the West was memorized by Chen Pinggan. He gathered and organized more than 100 answers. For example, if there were 100 illusions, someone might know 90 of them but wouldn't dare to say that they knew. But some people only knew 2 or 3 and already felt that they knew everything. Wu Shuangjiang finally asked with a smile, then how is it down and out? How is it down and out? You're in your own mountain, you should know this, right? Chen Pinggan hesitated and answered, first, we walk barefoot. At the same time, we sew straw sandals and wear them ourselves. We're also willing to give them to passers-by. If others don't want to accept them, we won't force them. After all, if we really want to argue, everyone has already worn their own shoes. Wu Shuangjiang shook his head and seemed very dissatisfied. First, there's no meaning to it at all. I was worried that you would run away from Zen. Ning Yarrow rested her chin on the railing with one hand. She just quietly looked at Chen Pinggan. He didn't feel that he was at a disadvantage in this question and answer with Wu Shuangjiang. How old was this Wu Shuangjiang now? How could Chen Pinggan compare? Kui Dongshan sat on the railing. This youth grotto was surrounded by great rivers and mountains. The scenery was magnificent. It made people sigh endlessly. Time flies like an arrow, the sun and the moon move like a passing youth. Jiang Shangzhen leaned on the railing and nodded. Moreover, the youth's hair turns white without noticing. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and asked, I'm only curious about one thing. Why are you so close to Buddhism? Chen Pinggan said, in a small town in my hometown, there are 4 signboards. When I was young, I heard the content and felt that there was only one principle, don't ask for help from outsiders. I could understand it and barely do it. Even if I did it, it was still useful. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and operated his supernatural powers. In the next moment, only he and Chen Pinggan left the Stork Tower and came to the outside of the ancestral hall of the Sui-Chu Palace at the peak of the mountain. This was the first time Wu Shuangjiang revealed a serious expression. He took out a talisman and said seriously, if by any chance, even you can't protect Tianran in the vast world. If 2 people are killed at the same time, then use this talisman on her. Chen Pinggan nodded, I agree. Wu Shuangjiang was puzzled. Why don't you ask me why I'm not worried that you'll use this talisman on others? It was the Taishian Clear Life talisman made by the Daoist ancestor. Chen Pinggan said, there are some things that only I can do. Others can't do it. Senior, you can rest assured. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and nodded, letting Chen Pinggan keep the talisman. Since you're willing to take on such a huge burden, it seems like your resentment towards the immortals of the Beko Keikyang building isn't small either. Chen Pinggan said, in the Beko Keikyang building, there are actually seniors that I admire very much. Wu Shuangjiang placed his hands behind his back and looked at the clouds and wind outside the mountain. Then, he pointed to a huge rock in the middle of the river near the Stork Tower. That's the Dragon Rest Rock over there. As long as you're a guest of the vast world and have the ability to return home, you can move it. Chen Pinggan looked at the Dragon Rest Rock and glanced at the Stork Tower from the corner of his eye. Wu Shuangjiang clicked his tongue in wonder. Lu Chen was right. He's just like me. A thief never leaves empty-handed. Wu Shuangjiang suddenly said, Little Bai is at the Pavilion of Eternal Peace. He's having a good chat with the City Lord of Hanging Arch City. Then, he agreed to beat up a person called Gao Shi. It seems like he's going to treat someone called Liang Juhan to a drink. I don't know much about the history of the vast world. What's the background of these two people? Chen Pinggan thought for a while and said, in the vast world, the various dynasties can choose the candidates for the martial temple at their discretion. Other than flattering the monarch, Gao Shi also followed the Confucian temple. He and a few colleagues decided on the candidates for the martial temple. In the end, only those with flawless achievements were chosen. Liang Juhan felt that this was inappropriate. He felt that there was no perfect sage in the world. He felt that it was too harsh on the ancients. This was definitely a forgiving speech. It's a pity that it wasn't accepted by the emperor at the time. Wu Shuangjiang nodded and said, Who doesn't have the slightest flaw but the hero? It's indeed a forgiving speech from a scholar. Chen Pinggan was a little helpless. Since the senior already knew, why did he still ask? Wu Shuangjiang glanced at the long sword on Chen Pinggan's back and said, If you dare to rest assured, I will help you refine it. Before I leave the vast world, I will unlock the natural restrictions. At that time, her combat strength will not be comparable to that of an ordinary Ascendant Realm cultivator. In the future, if you encounter some accidents on your path of cultivation, you can temporarily lend the long sword to her. In the battle between the cultivators on the top of the mountain, there were only two things that really competed: the highest lethality of the magic art or the flying sword, and the level of the ability to escape. This was also the reason why Wu Shuangjiang wanted to refine 4 imitation swords. Moreover, Wu Shuangjiang still had a few trump cards. Chen Pinggan cupped his fists and thanked him. He was very sincere in calling him senior. Wu Shuangjiang asked, What's the name of the long sword on your back? Chen Pinggan said, Night Tor. Wu Shuangjiang nodded and said, Good name. After a moment of silence, Wu Shuangjiang asked with a smile, Then we'll go back? Chen Pinggan had no objection. The small world dissipated, and everyone returned to the inn together. Chen Pinggan nodded to the 3 of them, indicating that everything was fine. Jiang Shangzhen asked, We can't just let that woman from Xingyang Mountain slip away after watching her for a long time, right? Kui Dongshan said with a smile, Then let's go back quickly. Chen Pinggan said, Thank you for your hard work. As a result, a chief consecrator thumped his chest and a proud student stamped his feet. Both of them were sad. Then, the 2 of them laughed and clapped their hands, cheering for the tacit understanding between them. The 2 of them were about to take out a mountain talisman and return to a secluded mountain around Zhengyang Mountain. Chen Pinggan coughed as a reminder. Kui Dongshan immediately understood and looked at old immortal Wu pitifully. Jiang Shangzhen's talisman drawing technique was very bad, even worse than the mountain master. As for Kui Dongshan and Chen Pinggan, they did not have much energy to draw the 3 mountains talisman. Wu Shuangjiang said with a smile, Then I'll have to trouble you to draw the 3 mountains in your heart first, Mr. Kui. Kui Dongshan nodded vigorously like a chicken pecking rice. The white-clothed youth did not move. Wu Shuangjiang just smiled and did not say anything. He took out his teacup again and began to drink tea leisurely. The 3 of you are not in a hurry, so why should I, an outsider, be in a hurry? Chen Pinggan was as still as a mountain. Where's the brush? Where's the cinnabar? Where's the talisman paper? It was as if the whole house was full of paupers, with nothing. Kui Dongshan covered his chest and coughed incessantly. Jiang Shangzhen held his snow-white sideburns with one hand. The older, the wiser. Chen Pinggan turned his head and asked Ning Yarrow if she wanted to drink. Ning Yarrow said yes, pick a pot. She didn't want the Osman thus wine anymore. Chen Pinggan said no problem. It's just that there are a lot of different types of wine, don't worry. Wu Shuangjiang laughed and said, a pirate ship, what a pirate's lair. After saying that, Wu Shuangjiang shook his head and put down his teacup helplessly. He took out a pen and a talisman. It turned out to be another F*King green talisman. Chen Pinggan's eyes widened. Good fellow, as expected of a senior who got along well with Daoist Sun. Chen Pinggan stood up at lightning speed. He first pressed the green talisman with his palm, then took out an ordinary talisman and hurriedly threw it to Kui Dongshan. Kui Dongshan took the precious talisman from the teacher, then stood up and bowed with his head down. He stretched out his hands and respectfully took the immortal pen with the inscription Flower Blossom from old immortal Wu. On the yellow talisman, Kui Dongshan drew the shape of the 3 mountains, then shook the flower blossom brush in his hand with all his might. It was as if the brush under the mountains was not dipped in enough ink and could not even wither. Jiang Shangzhen grumbled to Brother Kui and hurriedly gave old immortal Wu a precious writing brush from his own collection. Suddenly, the 3 of them were stunned on the spot. Kui Dongshan looked at the brush in his hand, then looked up at the teacher. Chen Pinggan looked at Kui Dongshan, then looked down at the green talisman in his hand. Wu Shuangjiang, on the other hand, took the talisman of the 3 mountains that was made of yellow paper and held the writing brush that Jiang Shangzhen handed over to him. He smiled and said, Mr. Kui and Master Jiang, don't you need my help to draw talismans? Wu Shuangjiang raised his hand and beckoned, too. Jiang Shangzhen and Kui Dongshan each obediently handed over a green talisman that had not yet warmed up. Wu Shuangjiang put the brush in his sleeve and beckoned again. Kui Dongshan could only hand over the flower blossom brush. He did not expect that after Wu Shuangjiang took the brush, he would put the 2 green talisman on the table into his sleeve and beckon to Chen Pinggan. It was obvious that the talisman that Chen Pinggan had put in his pocket had to be returned to Wu Shuangjiang. Chen Pinggan said helplessly, Senior, isn't this going too far? Wu Shuangjiang said, whoever has a higher cultivation level says what they want. Who was the one who said it before? Jiang Shangzhen lowered his head and looked down. The 3 of them went for wool and came home shorn. They even lost a green talisman, or more accurately, 2. Kui Dongshan braced himself and said, Sir, you should keep that one. Chief Ju and I still have one. Jiang Shangzhen slapped his forehead and ended up getting elbowed by Kui Dongshan. Wu Shuangjiang laughed and waved his hand. He took out 2 more green talisman and held the flower blossom brush. He concentrated and drew 2 more talismans in one go and gave them to Jiang Shangzhen and Kui Dongshan. Finally, he threw the flower blossom brush to the white-robed young man and said, I also wish Mr. Kui's wonderful brush blossoms and write a few more immortal poems. How to do business with others was one thing, giving gifts when one was in a good mood was another. Chen Pinggan was extremely moved. He had learned it. Kui Dongshan and Jiang Shangzhen each took out their talismans and were about to leave the night boat and return to the Aquarius continent. Chen Pinggan stood up and walked to their side. He held on to Kui Dongshan's head with one hand and suddenly hugged Jiang Shangzhen. He lightly punched Jiang Shangzhen's back. He did not have much to say to Kui Dongshan, Jiang Shangzhen, and Chen Pinggan. Jiang Shangzhen had an awkward expression for the first time. He hesitated for a moment, then hugged Chen Pinggan. In his entire life, he had never hugged a man. Even the eldest son Jiang Heng, when he was still in swaddling clothes, he did not receive such treatment. As the father, he had never hugged him. Chen Pinggan took 2 steps back and laughed, everything is going smoothly. Jiang Shangzhen suddenly wanted to say something but stopped. Chen Pinggan had some suspicions. Jiang Shangzhen lowered his voice and said, I heard that there is a consonant city here. I have admired the city lord for a long time. If it is possible, I will have to trouble Mountain Lord to pass on a message for me. Anything will do, Mountain Lord's words are the most appropriate. Chen Pinggan felt a headache coming on. Tilda appropriate your master Jiang. Tilda his face became awkward, and he turned to look at Ning Yao. Ning Yao said, a straight person is not afraid of a crooked shadow, and you are feeling guilty about such things? On the Jianghu Road, how many 300 taels of silver are there? Chen Pinggan retracted his gaze and smiled at Jiang Shangzhen, expressing his heartfelt gratitude. Jiang Shangzhen probed, then, don't pass on the message. Wu Shuangjiang sat there leisurely drinking tea and watching the show. He felt that this sect master Jiang was a wonderful person, and they hit it off very well. Kui Dongshan quickly helped to change the topic. Teacher, if you are free and go to that Shengse city and meet an old teacher whose legs are crippled, carrying a lantern to climb a ladder to write a list of people, and in the end, he was so scared that his hair turned white overnight, you must help me say a few words to him. His writing is really good, and he should not be banned from writing a list of people. Chen Pinggan knew who Kui Dongshan was talking about, and he agreed without hesitation. Jiang Shangzhen twirled the talisman and smiled. Thank you, Mountain Lord, for passing on the message. I will go now. Kui Dongshan took out the green bamboo cane Xing Qi Ming and lightly propped it on the ground. He laughed. Teacher, take care. I will go now. The white-clothed youth and the blue-clothed scholar disappeared in a flash. Wu Shuangjiang turned to look out the window and smiled. It will be dawn soon. Wu Shuangjiang turned his head and stood up. Then I will not disturb your conversation. I still have to look after the counter. Chen Pinggan asked, Senior, when will you leave the ferry and return to the Time Palace? Wu Shuangjiang smiled. Depends on my mood. Maybe even if I leave the night ferry, I will first make a trip to the wilderness. After Wu Shuangjiang left, Chen Pinggan and Ning Yao went to Pei Qian's room. Xiaomi was still sleeping soundly. After his master and mistress sat down, Pei Qian gently shook Xiaomi's head, but she did not wake up. He reached out and covered the little girl's nose and mouth. Xiaomi frowned slightly and was still in a daze. She slapped Pei Qian's hand away. It seemed like she could still sleep for a while. Pei Qian could only say, Xiaomi, time to patrol the mountain. Xiaomi immediately jumped up and rubbed her eyes as she shouted, okay, okay. Then she saw the good Mountain Lord, the Mountain Lord's wife, and Pei Qian with a mischievous smile. The black-clothed little girl covered her mouth with her hands and laughed loudly. Pei Qian did not lie. When she woke up, she saw everyone. Ning Yao said to the tired Chen Pinggan, you sleep for a while. I will accompany Pei Qian and Xiaomi and chat for a while. Chen Pinggan nodded and fell asleep on the table. As for whether Xiaomi would say something wrong, he did not care. After all, he was not afraid of a crooked shadow. At the entrance of the inn, Wu Shuangjiang, who still had the appearance of a young waiter, sat on a bench with his legs crossed and his eyes closed. He shook his head and played the erhu. Occasionally, he would open his eyes and smile gently. When he glanced sideways, it seemed like there was a girl sitting beside him with a peeper in her arms. She sang with the sounds of the peeper and the erhu, hoping that all the lovers in the world would find their way together. Chen Pinggan quickly rubbed the space between his eyebrows and came to his senses. The sound of the erhu was too noisy. Ning Yao pulled Pei Qian and Xiaomi back to her room. Chen Pinggan deliberately blocked the sound of the erhu. He took off his boots and sat cross-legged on the bed. He began to breathe and immerse himself in the music. When Chen Pinggan woke up, he realized that it was already dusk. Fortunately, there was no sound of the erhu. Chen Pinggan put on his boots and walked to the main hall of the inn. He saw that Ning Yao and the other two were there. Wu Shuangjiang had opened a book and was no longer playing the erhu. He had started to be a storyteller. Ning Yao and the other two were eating sunflower seeds and there was a plate of dried fish on the table. They were the audience. Chen Pinggan stood still. After listening for a moment, he began to break out in cold sweat. Wu Shuangjiang said that there was something in the book. The Jianghu heroine asked the young hero, dare I ask young master's surname and given name? There was also the beautiful ghost in the mountains. She smiled charmingly and asked the young man, why don't you take advantage of this beautiful night and play some tricks? Hearing this, Xiaomi frowned and asked Pei Qian what he meant. Pei Qian said he didn't know. Ning Yarrow glanced at him and smiled. You can ask the person involved. Chen Pinggan laughed and walked over. Pei Qian, Xiaomi, go get some peanuts, edamame and cucumber. I want to drink with Uncle Wu. I don't drink. Wu Shuangjiang closed the book. Many of the pages had folded corners, probably saying something like take advantage of this beautiful night. There were reminders. Wu Shuangjiang walked over to the door and leaned against it. He left the book on the table. After Chen Pinggan sat down, he felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He didn't even know that he was here to join in the fun. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and glanced at the table. Thinking back to the past, his sect was just as bustling as this. Chen Pinggan found an excuse and walked over to the door. He and Wu Shuangjiang were guarding the door. Both of them had their hands in their sleeves. If anyone looked at them, they really did look like that. Wu Shuangjiang said softly, if I'm not wrong, you'll have to go to the Confucian temple in the Central Plains soon. It's very likely that you'll be in the form of an out-of-body yin spirit. When that happens, you'll have two identities. You'll be standing among the top figures of Haoran Mountain. You'll be the last disciple of the Sage of Literature and the hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Chen Pinggan thought for a moment, is it to discuss how to deal with the wilderness? Wu Shuangjiang nodded and smiled. What else could it be? It's similar to the riverside discussion 10,000 years ago. If nothing goes wrong, you'll still be the youngest person. It was unknown if the Sage of Rites and the Sage of Sages would appear. However, there would definitely be the Sage of Literature, the Sage of Literature, the three leaders of the Confucian Temple, Fu Sheng, the three chancellors, the 72 headmasters and so on. The talisman Yu Xian, the great heavenly master of Dragon Tiger Mountain, Zheng Juzhong of White Emperor City, Pei Bei, Venerable Fire Dragon, Madame Qingzhong of Lushirai Pit, Liu Jubao of White Mountain Continent, Huayin, Yu Panshui, and so on. There might also be the great deity of Sui Mountain, Madam of Green Immortal Mountain, and so on. There would also be the Grand Masters of the 100 Schools of Thought. This was because the outcome of this discussion would determine the future of the two worlds. Wu Shuangjiang leaned his head back and leaned against the door. You're well behaved. You're a national scholar. Chen Pinggan said, you flatter me. Wu Shuangjiang smiled, I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about the sect that I built with my own hands. The mountains and rivers, the grotto for youth. Chen Pinggan nodded, it's similar to Daoist Sun's Xuanju Temple. It's fascinating. Wu Shuangjiang smiled, it'll be better if you remove the first half of the sentence. Chen Pinggan shook his head, our Luo Po mountain roams the Jianghu. We're upright and honest. Wu Shuangjiang rubbed his chin, it seems that this is the only thing that can't compare to your Luo Po mountain. Chen Pinggan did not reply. The origin of Luo Po mountain's atmosphere had always been a mystery. Just like how many melon seeds Ju Mili put in her pocket every day. The mountain chieftain said that it was bestowed by a certain proud student. Kui Dongshan swore that it was the work of his eldest senior sister. Pei Qian said that it was the knowledge of old chef at the dining table. She only listened to a few ears and learned a little. Zhu Lian said that it was the evil wind that spread from Cloud Padding Mountain that could not be stopped. Wei Pai said that he had benefited a lot from playing chess with brother Dafeng. The pitiful Zheng Dafeng, who had worked hard as a gatekeeper for so many years, had no chance to refute anything now that he was in the fifth world. Wu Shuangjiang muttered to himself, throwing an egg at a stone. All the eggs in the world are still the same, unbreakable. Chen Pinggan said, I don't think so. Wu Shuangjiang nodded, sincerity can move metal and stone. You have to believe in it. He asked again, do you know which line of your Confucian sage I like the most? Chen Pinggan probed, returning good for good, returning evil with justice. Wu Shuangjiang clicked his tongue, what's with your brain? You can even guess that. On the table in the room, Xiaomi put her hands on the table and shouted, Mountain Chieftain, Mr. Wu, there's no more dried fish in the creek. Wu Shuangjiang turned his head and smiled, it's fine. My share is yours. Chen Pinggan also smiled and nodded in agreement. Xiaomi pursed her lips and nodded again. She raised her hands and gave 2 thumbs up. It was unknown whether she was thanking him or asking about something else. A small amount of dried fish was nothing. Wu Shuangjiang suddenly sighed, a happy family. Chen Pinggan softly said, "It's the new year." 781. In the twilight, Wu Shuangjiang suddenly said that he wanted to leave. The long-sword night wandering that he threw to Chen Pinggan had already been completely refined in half a day. After Chen Pinggan received night wandering, he shamelessly asked Wu Shuangjiang for a copy of his calligraphy. In the Qingming world, it was publicly acknowledged that the calligraphy written by the cultivators who had been removed from the palace could exorcise ghosts. The characters were like hanging talismans, and were even more effective. Of course, Chen Pinggan did not want to rely on Wu Shuangjiang's calligraphy to exorcise ghosts and ward off evil spirits. That would be too wasteful. He wanted to keep it as a souvenir of the night boat trip. In the future, he would hang it in his Luo Po mountain study. When a guest came to visit, no matter who it was, wouldn't they have to ask whether it was authentic or fake? Wu Shuangjiang agreed. Chen Pinggan took out brush, ink, paper, and inkstone in the main hall. After Xiao Mi Li cleaned up the table, he helped spread out the rice paper and leaned over the table to grind the ink. Wu Shuangjiang looked at the ordinary brushes and ink sticks at the foot of the mountain. He seemed to have lost interest in writing. Chen Pinggan said helplessly, "I really only have these things on me. Senior, please make do with them." Wu Shuangjiang laughed and said, "Luo Po mountain can afford to lose face, but I can't. In that case, let's forget about it." Chen Pinggan hurriedly said, "Then can Junior go and borrow the 4 treasures of the study from Li Shilang?" Wu Shuangjiang glanced at the sky outside and shook his head. "We can't let Xiao Bai wait too long." Xiao Mi Li was still grinding the ink stick. He anxiously raised his hand to scratch his head. He said pitifully, Mr. Wu, can I just write a few words? When we go out, we walk the Jianghu. Why don't we just make do with it?" Wu Shuangjiang thought for a moment and nodded. "That makes sense." Wu Shuangjiang took out the document he always carried with him from his sleeve and spread out a piece of colorful cloud. He then took out a bamboo brush and carved a line of Xiaozhuan characters on it. On one side of the inkstone, there was an inscription of the immortal cave. A pair of pocket-sized hornless dragons were lying on the ancient inkstone. Wu Shuangjiang tapped the hornless dragon's head with the tip of the brush. The 2 hornless dragons immediately opened their golden eyes, and a layer of golden ripples appeared on the ancient inkstone. Wu Shuangjiang dipped the brush into the ink, and the tip of the brush turned golden. At that time, I only thought that it was normal and didn't believe that there would be white hair in the world. The bright moon was resting alone in a tall building, suddenly came to the window and suspected that it was you. Finally, there were 3 places where Wu Shuangjiang's personal seals and a flower mark were printed. A scholar on a military horse, commanding an army of 1,000,000. The realm of old age. Her heart was like a green lotus in the world. Chen Pinggan stood to the side and gently rubbed his hands. He sighed, "Senior, with such good handwriting, it's a pity that you didn't write another couplet. Good things come in pairs. Pay attention to it." Wu Shuangjiang smiled. 2 pieces of couplet paper made of red appeared on the table. On each couplet, there were 7 golden dragon patterns, as if they were waiting to be written. Not only that, he also took out a small wooden box from his sleeve. After opening it, there were 7 small porcelain boxes lined up. It was the famous 7 treasures clay from the old age. On the mountain, Jun Yuqiu had once obtained a great opportunity from the ruins of an immortal abode. He moved the ancient mountain back to the sect. After the mountain took root, strange phenomena occurred. There were often scenes of cinnabar flying like colorful clouds. After immortals refined the flying sand, they gathered 7 colors, which was the 7 treasures clay. There was a saying that 1 tael of colored clay was equivalent to 1 kati of grain rain money. Chen Pinggan was a little puzzled. There was no need to pay attention to the 7 colored words when writing couplets, right? However, he did not dare to ask further, afraid that the cooked duck would fly away if he did. Wu Shuangjiang did not explain anything. He dipped the brush in the 7-colored sand and wrote 7 words on each of the couplets. Returning the brush is like a mountain without enough treasures. Only by reading 10,000 scrolls will one be able to attain enlightenment. Wu Shuangjiang gently exhaled towards the couplet. The 14 golden dragons on the couplet seemed to have been given a finishing touch. They slowly rotated in a circle and then became still. Susie's poem and Wu Shuangjiang's inscription. At the same time, he took advantage of the young man beside him. Chen Pinggan, who had become the second nephew for nothing, did not have any grudges. He just pretended that he did not know about such an illusion. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and said, "Just treat it as a congratulatory gift for the completion of the sect at the foot of the Luopo mountain. It can be used as a couplet to hang at the door of the ancestral hall. The words on the couplet change according to the time. During the day, black words will be written, white words will be written at night. The quality is not low. If it is hung at the door of the Luopo Mountain's Jise Peak, it is enough to make the mountain lord Wei Pai and the other mountain gods, ghosts and monsters, to stop outside the door. They do not dare and cannot take half a step. However, you have to promise me one thing. Whenever you feel that you have done something wrong and that it is difficult to change, you have to take down this couplet." Chen Pinggan took a step back and bowed to the Suichu Palace Lord, who said with a smile, "I once had the chance to refine 1 or 2 natal characters." Wu Shuangjiang waved his hand and only kept a few seals. He turned his head and smiled at the black-clothed girl. "Xiao Mili, the rest of the stationery on the table are all for you. Treat it as a return gift for your dried fish and melon seeds. As for who you give it to later, I don't care." Ju Mili hurriedly waved her hand. No, the dried fish and melon seeds do not cost money." Wu Shuangjiang smiled and turned to leave. He strode over the threshold. Xiao Mili ran over and caught up with Mr. Wu. She took out 2 bags of dried fish from her sleeves and scratched her face. She was a little embarrassed. Mr. Wu, that's all. I'll give it to you. Don't think it's too little. If you really think it's too little, it's not a problem." Wu Shuangjiang smiled and took the 2 bags of dried fish. He thanked her and gently patted the little girl's head. Then, he left. Wu Shuangjiang took a step and left the city. Xiao Mili waved her hand and stood outside the door. She looked around for a long time and sighed. She was a little envious of Mr. Wu's skills. He did not even need to ride the wind and disappeared with a whoosh. Wasn't that the divine immortal realm that started from the Jindan realm? What was she thinking? How could the earth immortal realm be enough? Perhaps he was the legendary unpolished jade realm. Sigh, his realm was so high. He was as high as Wei Shanjun. How many night banquets had Mr. Wu hosted in his hometown? No wonder he gave people gifts without blinking. He was generous and generous. This was how one should be in the Jianghu. That silly girl he met at the Mute Lake was not a bad person. It was just that her hair was long and her knowledge was short. She could sell the big water monster at the Mute Lake for 1 grain of rice rain money. Xiao Mili swaggered back to the table in the hall. Chen Pinggan kept the copybook and couplets and put them into the Fengsuan object. He smiled at Xiao Mili and said, "Ancient inkstone, green bamboo brush, 7 treasure mud. These 3 things, let Pei Qian keep them for you first." Xiao Mili was stunned for a moment. The little girl glanced at the items on the table, but I have already thought about how to give them away. Chen Pinggan smiled, "You don't have to give them away. Just keep them well. When you return to Luopo Mountain in the future, remember not to throw them away." Xiao Mili said seriously, "At first, I planned to give them all to the Hill Master's wife. If the Hill Master's wife didn't accept them, I wouldn't have the courage to insist. When I return home, I will give the 7 treasure mud to Sister Nuanshu. She likes to keep records every day. I will give the ancient inkstone to Jing Qing and the green bamboo brush to Wei Shanjun. Isn't there a bamboo forest in the Pinning Cloud Mountain? I don't know why old chef and Pei Qian didn't go there themselves. They asked me to go there secretly and count how many bamboos there. I was thinking that if Wei Shanjun received the gifts, he would be happy and give me a bamboo for free." Ning Yarrow held back her laughter and rubbed Xiao Mili's head. Pei Qian pretended that he didn't know anything. As long as his master asked, he would push everything to old chef. Chen Pinggan felt uneasy for the first time. He didn't know how Wei Shanjun felt when Xiao Mili wandered around the bamboo forest and seriously counted the bamboos with a wrench. A white-haired boy poked his head out from the corner of the corridor and asked, "Hidden official patriarch, where is that person? Did he leave? How was your chat?" Chen Pinggan turned his head and said, "He left the city. We had a good chat. You don't have to do anything." The white-haired boy laughed. He put his hands on his waist and shook his shoulders. He strode to the table. "Hidden official patriarch is indeed invincible. I don't even have the chance to show my loyalty. Otherwise, as long as I put in a little effort, I would definitely be able to defeat the enemy with hidden official patriarch. What a pity, what a pity." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Then should I invite him back?" The white-haired boy's knees went soft. He reached out to hold the table and said with a trembling voice, "I don't think that's necessary. After all, it's easier to invite a god than to send him away." From the beginning to the end, it was very baffling. When it saw Wu Shuangjiang and chatted with Pei Qian, it was like falling into the clouds. When it came out of the maze, Wu Shuangjiang was gone. What was also gone was its realm as an otherworldly demon. It appeared in a state similar to a person without a realm. Chen Pinggan glanced at it and said, "Let's go to the house and talk." They went back to Chen Pinggan's house together. Chen Pinggan took out the copybook. "It should be the senior who wanted me to pass it to you." The white-haired boy nodded. Just as he took the book, the two seals on the book, a scholar on a military horse, commanding an army of 1,000,000 and both men and books grow old, a total of 13 words, instantly dimmed and lost their luster. He had a complicated expression and was speechless. Chen Pinggan took out the blade-strengthening gourd and drank a mouthful of wine to calm himself down. The spells and supernatural powers of a 14th realm great cultivator were really unreasonable. It shook its head vigorously and soon returned to its usual expression. Looking at the virtual objects that Chen Pinggan had obtained in Entry City, it picked up the Narcissus porcelain basin, flipped it over, and snorted disdainfully before throwing it on the table. Xiaomi hurriedly pounced forward, straightened it with both hands, and moved to its side. It gently blew at the small porcelain basin and wiped it with its sleeve. The white-haired boy took over the iron-cast 3 monkeys fishing the moon and nodded slightly, saying, "If it's a real object, it's still passable." Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "What do you mean?" The white-haired boy said, "Every moonlit night, you can take out this item. Just by basking in the moonlight, you can condense the moonlight and gradually nurture a soul similar to a flower protector. If the cultivator's luck is better, he might even become a deputy officer of the flower deity temple and be in charge of some kind of flower messenger. In the flower arrangement, Osmanthus is the best, followed by Epiphyllum and Peony. Those monsters in the world who walk the path of moon worship and refining, no matter how high their realms are, will definitely be willing to pay a high price. With this item, you can save a lot of trouble. If you take it to that 100 flowers blessed land, you can just casually find a flower master of the blessed land or a few life masters and flower deities to sell it for a sky-high price. The white-haired boy was puzzled. "This 100 flowers blessed land, why do you look like you've never heard of it and have no interest?" Back then, under the grape trellis of the prison's cultivation ground, you were looking at those flower deity cups with shining eyes and rubbing your palms. At that time, I felt that if I were the flower master of the blessed land, I would start to worry about whether my own territory would be the 1-meter higher sky. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "As long as it's a place with money in the world, there will be a bag shop." The white-haired boy nodded and picked up the ebony paperweight. He asked, "I didn't expect you to be a zither player too. You're really multi-talented." Chen Pinggan put down the blade-strengthening gourd in his hand and asked, "Can you write the complete Guangling stopping music?" It nodded. "What's so difficult about that?" The palace master of the Sui Gong, Wu Shuangjiang, was famous in the world for his talent. He was good at poetry, music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. As Wu Shuangjiang's inner demon, it knew everything that Wu Shuangjiang knew except for a few killer attacks that had been set up by Wu Shuangjiang. The white-haired boy pointed in the air and wrote the complete music score that had been lost in the world for a long time. Chen Pingan copied it on the paper. It yawned and asked with a puzzled face, "Is that all you've got, Elder Ingguan?" Chen Pingan nodded. Pei Qian was expressionless and only ate melon seeds. Ju Mili waved her hand vigorously and said, "No, there's really no more." The white-haired boy chuckled and said, "Yes, there's definitely more. Quickly bring out the treasures at the bottom of the box." Ju Mili crossed her arms and said with a serious face, "If there is, I'll treat you to pickled fish." "Is pickled fish delicious?" "It's the worst thing in the world. No one likes it." "Since no one eats pickled fish, and no one eats it even if I treat them, then there's no more." Chen Pingan covered his forehead with his hand. What a reasonable choice of words. It must have been hard on little Mealy. Ning Yaro's lips curled up. Pei Qian glanced at his master. Chen Pingan nodded helplessly. Pei Qian said to Ju Mealy, "Take it out." Little Mealy was anxious and gave Pei Qian a meaningful look. She had hidden it well, so why didn't he give it out? Pei Qian nodded. The black-clothed girl immediately ran out of the house and went to Pei Qian's house. She took out the scroll from the green bamboo box and ran back. She pursed her lips and was not in a hurry to place it on the table. Little Mealy only held the scroll and looked at the good mountain chieftain with a serious face. It was as if she was saying, "I've really given it to you. If the mountain chieftain's wife wants to say something, you can't blame me." Chen Pingan glanced at his first disciple and grumbled, "I've already given it to you. What's there to hide?" Pei Qian smiled and nodded. Then, he looked at the white-haired boy who was the main culprit. Chen Pingan handed the booklet given by the bearded man to Ning Yaro. Ning Yaro casually flipped through it and found that every opportunity was like a riddle. The words on the booklet were like immortal ferries. The names of the ferries were all there, but it didn't tell the spectators how to get to the ferries. The white-haired boy looked at the scroll on the table. It was made of white jade and there was a small note pasted on the outside. The handwriting could barely be considered beautiful. The content was boastful, saying that it was going to teach all the women in the world how to dress up. After opening it, there were different eyebrows and hair buns of beauties. There were even annotations. There were a total of 24 beauties. The white-haired boy looked at them one by one and clicked his tongue in wonder. He kept muttering, "Good, good, good. Although the spring mountain is small, it can raise clouds. The moon palace's axe mark is lacking, only then can it be ranked above the beauty's eyebrows. Flying immortal, descending before the emperor. Mother, this sentence is still the best. This sentence is the best." Turning back to see the husband spinning down the curtain, "The husband wants to hug, as sweet as smoke." The white-haired boy raised his head and said seriously, "Since the hidden official ancestor is proficient in seal engraving, why don't you copy all kinds of eyebrows on the letters? In the future, half of the Dao companions in the mountains will have to use the letters produced by our Luo Po mountain to send letters and flying sword. I think it's feasible. It's definitely feasible. Money will definitely come rolling in." "That's right. I think it's a good idea. It's definitely a good idea." Chen Pingan rewarded him with one word, "Get lost." Zhu Lian or Mi, you were more suitable for this kind of unconscionable money. The white-haired boy looked hurt, which chilled the hearts of all the soldiers. He picked up the last bundle of withered plum branches and weighed it a few times. He wondered, hidden official ancestor, what's this? Are we really picking up scraps? Chen Pingan threw the booklet to the white-haired boy. He flipped to the page of plum branches and found that there seemed to be two connections, each with its own opportunity. He could choose one. One of the clues was something about Shengyang Palace, Plum Essence, South Jiao Chapter, Jiang Langzhong, Dragon Lake Drunkard, and Zhulu. The other was the bookstore, Corpse, World's Hot Guest, Boneless Flowers, and Duckweed Pavilion. The white-haired boy was confused. After all, he came from Qingming Tian. He was completely at a loss when he saw these. He closed the booklet and said righteously, "Hidden official ancestor, why waste so much effort? Why don't we just snatch it from him? If I'm caught red-handed, it's fine. Ancestor Yin Guan, you can just run away when the time comes. If you leave me behind, I'll bear all the consequences." Ning Yaro asked curiously, What do you mean by this bundle of plum branches? Chen Pinggan smiled and explained, Shangyang Palace, this plum essence nickname refers to a concubine. She has a younger brother called Jiang Caichin. Their family has been in the medical field for generations. As for the Dragon Lake drunkard, it refers to the different intentions of the two vassal kings. Anyway, after all the twists and turns, the opportunity that they got in the end was most likely some kind of tangible gift from the blessed land of 100 flowers, the lunar flower goddess. Otherwise, it's related to Lady Ruoyon in the plum blossom garden in the inverted hanging mountain, so it's meaningless. However, there's another clue that I'm very interested in. It's because I'm selfish. If I'm not wrong, we'll first go to the bookstore in the mustard garden in the City of Events. Because Li Shilang is good at making plum blossom windows, and in the article of the Department of Household Affairs, Li Shilang even cited this as the best production of his life. Therefore, I'm afraid that next, we'll need to buy the first edition of the biography of painting as a bridge to find the bookseller Wang Gari. This person once had the nickname the hottest guest in the world, Wang Anjie, so that we can get in touch with his brother Wang Bei. This person's real name is Wang Shuo, and he's good at making seals and painting boneless flowers. Therefore, this will involve an old gentleman that I admire very much. He's good at drawing plum blossoms and is the best in the world. He happens to be the owner of the Plum Blossom House and the floating duckweed pavilion. Not only that, it's said that this old gentleman is the first person in the world to carve seals with stone. With such a rare opportunity, how can I miss it? I must pay a visit to the old gentleman. If there's really any opportunity, I can exchange it with the old gentleman for a seal. At this point, Chen Pinggan was in high spirits, just like when he heard the name Li Shilang for the first time. For example, people like Jiang Shangzhen would always have people they wanted to meet on the night boat. It was the rain that withered and the wind that suddenly turned green, it was the cup of deep amber on the flower selling pole, it was the heart that had just sunk, it was the 3 times in 2 years, it was the person who was thinner than the yellow flower. In fact, Chen Pinggan wanted to visit more sages and ancients in books. Ning Yarrow was used to Chen Pinggan's ability to solve puzzles. She only said how Chen Pinggan's affinity with the elders came about, and that was how it came about. Pei Qian's face was full of righteousness. In any case, Zhu Mili could only hear vaguely. As long as the good mountain lord didn't compete with others in poetry, he was very powerful. Only the extraterrestrial demon was dumbfounded by the series of from this to that, from the vine to the melon, and through the door. He praised from the bottom of his heart, Ancestor Yingguan, this night boat should be steered by you. Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, far from it. It's just a 2-legged bookcase. It wasn't that he was belittling himself, but that was the truth. The night boat was only one city, but it had already made Chen Pinggan gasp in amazement. If it wasn't for the fact that it was difficult to distinguish friend from foe, and that he had other matters to attend to, Chen Pinggan really wouldn't mind strolling through the 12 cities one by one on this ferry, even if it would take him 2 or 3 years. The white-haired boy rubbed his hands, his eyes shining. I'm rich, I'm rich. With Ancestor Yingguan giving me pointers, and with my help, won't the immortals' fated chances on this ferry become barren? Chen Pinggan said, I still have important matters to attend to, so other than the plum branch, I won't fight for the other fated chances. The white-haired boy pounded his chest with both hands. Is this still the arrogant and greedy Ancestor Yingguan that I know? Chen Pinggan said, I want to ask Senior Wang Yuanzhong for a seal. I've already thought of the seal. It'll be clear air fills the universe, scattering into thousands of miles of spring. After a moment of silence, Chen Pinggan took a sip of wine and said softly, if I can get 2 seals, of course, it'll be better. The seal will be Wanderer's Journey. The white-haired boy clapped his hands and cheered, the seal is excellent. Ancestor Yingguan's literary talent is unparalleled. Chen Pinggan glanced at him sideways. It's something from the old mister's poem. I'm just copying it. The white-haired boy raised his arms and shouted, Ancestor Yingguan's memory is invincible. With one punch, he moved a mountain of books, and with one kick, he toppled a sea of literature. He's number 1 in the world, and no one dares to claim to be number 2. Because I'm too close to Ancestor Yingguan, I can only claim to be number 3. In any case, As long as he had a clear conscience, there was no awkward flattery in the world. Chen Pinggan suddenly said, according to Court Chief Wu's prediction, I might make a trip to Middle-earth's Confucian temple at some point in time. As for when I'll go and how I'll return, it's hard to say. The white-haired boy kept quiet out of fear. He sat back on the bench and wiped the table repeatedly with one hand. Ning Yarrow said, I'll take care of Pei Qian and Xiaomi. Chen Pinggan smiled. Then, let's go solve the riddle. Xiaomi jumped down from the bench. Yes, sir. The group of people packed their luggage and left the inn. They followed the clues, and just as Chen Pinggan had said, they followed the clues all the way. Just as they had expected, they bought whatever they wanted and chatted whatever they wanted. Finally, in a secret realm of mountains and rivers with thousands of plum blossoms, Chen Pinggan used an opportunity that he should have gotten from an immortal plum tree to exchange for 2 seals from the old master, Wang Yuanzhong. Unexpectedly, the old master stroked his beard and smiled. He even gave Chen Pinggan 2 plum blossom paintings, one dark plum blossom and the other white plum blossom. The contents of the seals that Chen Pinggan had asked for came from the poems inscribed on the paintings. Chen Pinggan took the paintings and bowed again to express his gratitude. Thinking of something, Chen Pinggan said, I heard that there was a sect master sword immortal in the Tongyi continent. He climbed the mountain in the snow and said something similar to what you wrote in the history books. Everyone in his sect had heard of it. However, the sword immortal added the words most suitable for unsheathing the sword at the end. Hence, this sword immortal must have admired you a lot. The old man smiled. Is it that the heaven and earth are made of white jade, making one's courage clear and wanting to ascend to immortality? Chen Pinggan held the scroll and nodded gently. The old man asked, a sword immortal who spoke to the heaven and earth in such a manner in the Tongyi continent. Then, he must be dead. Chen Pinggan nodded. He died in battle. That sword immortal was the sect master of the Tongyi sect, Fu Lingqing. The old man asked Chen Pinggan to wait for a while before giving Chen Pinggan 2 seals. They were inscribed with the words wind and snow add to the fun and arrogant scholar of the world. Chen Pinggan scratched his head and blushed. The old man smiled. Although I still don't know who you are, I hope that there will be more young people like you in the vast world today. Pointing elsewhere, the old man said seriously, remember not to learn from Xiao Baohuan from Rong Cheng. It's as if he has been a gentleman for many years and is waiting to be a bad person for once. Then, he will never turn back. It's such a pity. After leaving the mystic realm, Chen Pinggan used the music score written by the white-haired boy to exchange for 3 city passes. Usually, exchanging 2 city passes for a certain piece of knowledge was the limit. It was obvious that the night sailing ship valued the Guangling rest stop music score very much. At first, the white-haired boy was still proud of himself. He walked very lightly outside the shop. However, after knowing that there were 12 cities on the night sailing ship, he immediately started cursing. Xiaomi hurriedly hugged this short, white-haired boy. The white-haired boy was still cursing and flying towards the shop. Xiaomi leaned back and swayed. It took her a lot of effort to ensure that the 2 of them did not fall. After the white-haired boy finished cursing, his feet landed on the ground. He turned around and patted Xiaomi's shoulder. Your loyalty is exemplary. You have done well to protect the emperor. When we return, I will reward you with some good things. Xiaomi did not take his words seriously. She only grinned and said, I think I was drunk just now. The white-haired boy gestured their height and shook his head. Xiaomi, every time I talk to you, if I don't lower my head, I won't be able to see you. How can this do? In the future, I will ask our hidden official old ancestor to build you a small stool. You have to stand when you talk to me. Xiaomi frowned and secretly tiptoed. In the end, she realized that the white-haired boy seemed to have grown taller. When she lowered her head to look, the white-haired boy immediately retracted his toes. When Xiaomi suddenly raised her head, he instantly tiptoed again. Xiaomi took a few steps back. The white-haired boy had already turned around and left with his hands behind his back. They first went to Weigong City to meet the old master who held a lamp in the night to write the announcement. Chen Pinggan helped Kui Dongshan pass on a message. On the way, Xiaomi asked softly, Pei Qian, Li Huai said that you are a princess of a fallen country. Can you find your father here? Pei Qian did not reply. Xiaomi continued to ask, do you need my help? The people I find are very good. They have the ability to patrol the mountains. Pei Qian knocked her with a small chestnut. Ju Mili covered her head with her hands. She immediately understood that she would not be able to find her father. She was indeed asking for a beating by rubbing salt on Pei Qian's wound. They were still at the bank of the river during the dry season. The cliff at the bottom of the river was revealed. Deep in the Dragon Palace, in a wine shop, they met a young man who called himself Lord Young Master. He was about to write on the wall. There was also a young man who was absent-minded. He muttered to himself and asked where the ancient sword was. Outside the shop, a tall man with greasy clothes walked past. He looked at a lively young girl who was tiptoeing and twirling her skirt in the distance. His eyebrows were slender. The man felt that this year was her. He had not read a vast book with 440,000 words in vain. There were beauties both inside and outside the book. The white-haired boy who was slamming his hands on the table and shouting for good wine immediately shut up. Chen Pinggan suddenly stood up and walked to the outside of the wine shop. He looked up at the sky. At the Lotus Pond in Appearance City. The two people who strolled around Color City first broke through the mountain and water restrictions and directly appeared here. Wu Shuangjiang. Beside him was the young shopkeeper of the Hanging Mountain Stalk Inn. In the pavilion, the disciplinary officer sat alone. The direct disciple Du Shanyin and the maid Qing were not here. It seemed that the Sword Immortal was waiting for this 14th realm cultivator. Wu Shuangjiang smiled, little white, go somewhere else. Bai Luo smiled and nodded, the disciplinary officer doesn't have so many small worlds to help you hide your 14th realm. Wu Shuangjiang said, it's just a disciplinary officer. It's not like he's a hidden officer. There's no need for him to be at the 14th realm. After Bai Luo left, Wu Shuangjiang put his hands behind his back and slowly walked forward. 4 immortal swords came out of his sleeves. He smiled, flowers bloom in the cage. A caged sparrow imitating sword and a moon in the well imitating sword, together with the words flowers bloom. Between heaven and earth, Wu Shuangjiang was everywhere. They were all immortal swords. As for why he wanted to fight today, the reason was simple. Wu Shuangjiang's Daoist partner was often chased by this disciplinary officer with flying swords in the prison of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. A moment later, the night boat was split into 2 by the sword light. At the same time, a voice sounded in Chen Pinggan's mind, can you come to the Confucian temple? Chen Pinggan asked tentatively, is it the Sage of Rites? After receiving an affirmative answer, Chen Pinggan bowed, thank you, Sage of Rites. After Alliance left the square of the Confucian temple, he seemed to be traveling, but in fact, he secretly went to a restriction in the Forest of Merits. He talked to the sage who accompanied him and was not refused entry. However, in the end, he still had to exchange some merits for it. Only then did he meet the bearded ranger. It was said to be a forbidden area. There were no formations or restrictions and no one was watching over it. It was just a fragmented secret realm with beautiful scenery. Liu Cha was squatting by the water, fishing with a pole. Alliance came to Liu Cha's side and remained silent. Liu Cha didn't say anything either. Alliance sighed and shook his head. He walked to Liu Cha's back and kicked the sword cultivator's butt. He used so much strength that Liu Xie almost fell forward. However, he still held the pole with one hand and supported himself with the other, so he didn't fall flat on his face. He squatted down again. His expression didn't change at all. Alliance stood on one leg. He crossed one leg and rubbed the back of his foot. He complained that there was no such thing as an iron pole in the world. He hopped over to Liu Cha's side and sat down cross-legged. He picked up a blade of grass and brushed the dirt off it. Then he held it in his mouth and slowly chewed on the grass. He mumbled, Brother Liu, what did the Confucian temple say? Liu Cha said, Sage of Rites just asked me to stay here. That's all. He was able to pass the sword to Bai Yi. That's impressive. A defeated general dares not speak of bravery. In the Jinjiao continent, there was only one painting. It was the scene where Liu Cha killed Bai Yi with his sword. It was copied by some busybodies with magic arts. Therefore, every time the painting was opened and the bearded swordsman showed up, the onlookers would exclaim his name before he passed the sword. Liu Cha. As time passed, the name Liu Cha gradually evolved into a saying filled with awe. It was like a catchphrase. 2 words, one saying, but they could encompass many meanings. As for Liu Cha's swordsmanship, especially his poems, they were not as well known as his name. In the central divine continent, Liu Cha's name was known by everyone. Alliance hugged his head and leaned back. He said softly, "If I knew this would happen, I would have killed you at the Great Wall of Sword Qi." It was not that Liu Cha killed Bai Yi. It was that he was stopped by Chen Chunan at the ultimate. As for the mellow Chen Chunan, he got along well with a Liang. Of course, it was only Alliance who thought that they hit it off. Liu Cha said, "Don't make it sound so nice. Fighting with a Liang was more or less the same as exchanging one's life." Alliance crossed his legs and swung them gently. "In this life, I have 3 good brothers. They are all in the same boat. One is an old Shoutsai. They are all talented and can't make a name for themselves. One is Chen Pinggan. One stands on the city wall, one lies at the foot of the mountain. We can only look at each other from afar. We are in the same boat. Then it's you. Both of us fell from the 14th level." Liu Cha said, "Are you done?" Alliance said, "Why do you care?" Liu Cha said no more and continued fishing. Alliance took a nap before getting up. He said that he would come here to drink when he was free. The man spread out his hands and spun away. He still used the Zhenghu's cloud ladder to jump up and down. Liu Cha glanced at him, feeling very curious. Could it be that this fellow was also like this when he was in the secondary Saint Manor? In a sect of the Central Plains, a certain jade unpolished realm cultivator who had been half dead by Qi Tingji had just finished recuperating in seclusion. He came out of seclusion for a few days with great difficulty to attend a meeting in the ancestral hall. There was a masked man who only revealed a pair of shifty eyes. In broad daylight, he broke through the sect's formation and landed on the square outside the ancestral hall. He made a gesture of gathering qi in his dantian. Then he put his hands on his forehead and smoothed his hair back. He called out the name of the jade unpolished realm cultivator several times and loudly asked where he was. Everything happened so suddenly that a young and promising consecrator of the ancestral hall didn't notice the strange looks on everyone's faces, as if they wanted to say something but were fiercely suppressing it. He stepped forward bravely and crossed the threshold of the ancestral hall. He angrily rebuked the masked man. "Which scoundrel dares to trespass here?" The masked man's eyes darted around as he winked at a fairy who was hovering in the air in the distance. The short masked man raised his fist and waved it behind him. The jade unpolished realm cultivator at the entrance of the ancestral hall seemed to have been hit in the head by a heavy hammer. He fainted on the spot and fell to the ground. His waist leaned against the threshold and his body arched like a bridge. Inside the ancestral hall, from the sect master to the minister of justice to the consecrators, everyone was holding their breaths. Most of them didn't even get up. There were a few unkind ones who turned around and chatted with their friends to prove their innocence. That guy had been here before. It wasn't the first time. After that, the jade unpolished realm ancestral hall consecrator met with a pitiful end. Central Plains, Xuanmi dynasty. A rich man was admiring a game of chess in a pavilion. Suddenly, a man appeared behind him and strangled him. The rich man coughed and couldn't speak. He slapped the man's arm with all his strength. The old man's round face turned purple and then white. There were signs of him rolling his eyes. Only then did the man let go of his hand. Yu Panshue gasped for breath. Mother ***, he knew who was here. No one in the world could do such a wicked thing. Unexpectedly, the man strangled the old man's neck again and scolded, "Fatty you, what's wrong with you? You didn't even smile when you saw your good brother. You didn't even greet him." "Ah, I knew it. There must be someone in my hometown who secretly made a scarecrow every day and cursed me to not be able to return home. Good Lord, it's you? After saying that, he lifted his arm. The old man could only stand on his tiptoes like a ghost. It wasn't that the old man was pretending to be pitiful, but the son of Ab*tch behind him was really ruthless. Yu Panshui had to force his yin spirit out of his body. He stood beside the man, stomped his feet hard, clapped his hands, and exclaimed, "Oh, it's Brother Alliance. I haven't seen you for a few years, and your muscles are so strong. TSK, TSK, TSK. You're worthy of experiencing the glory of a 14th realm sword cultivator. But realms don't mean much. To Brother Alliance, it's your manliness. The last time we met, you had already reached the peak. Unexpectedly, you can still go one step further. Admirable, admirable. I'm drooling, I'm drooling." Only then did Alliance let go of his hand. He pushed the yin spirit's head and let it return to its real body. Sitting on a bench in the pavilion, he spread his hands on the railing and crossed his legs. He let out a long breath and threw a glance at Yu Panshui. Yu Panshui understood tacitly. Immediately, a wisp of green smoke swept out from the pavilion and floated over. Finally, it condensed into a beautiful woman. She curtsied and smiled sweetly at the man. "Greetings, Mr." Alliance jumped up and reached out to wipe his hair. "I'm so distant. Call me little brother Alliance." Yu Panshui regretted eating and drinking too much today. Alliance waved his hand and said, "Fatty you, wipe your own shit." Yu Panshui played dumb. Alliance smiled and said, "You can call yourself Alliance. In the Xianmi dynasty, there was a famous mountain elder of the academy at the foot of the mountain. He was known as the boldest scholar in the central divine continent by many scholars. When Yu Panshui returned, Alliance left in a hurry and said, "Yu Panshui, you have dog guts. How dare you hit me?" Yu Panshui sighed. After Alliance left, he found an old immortal, an old acquaintance. The old immortal sneered and said, "Is it against the law to say a few words? You can scold me, you can hit me. If I fight back, it's my loss." He met a shameless old scoundrel. Alliance shouted angrily and said with grief and indignation, "Good, good, good. Bullying me because my cultivation is low, you want to fight with me? You can kill me, but you can't humiliate me. Even if I'm beaten to death by you, I won't take this kind of humiliation today." His voice was so loud that it spread up and down the peaks of the sect. Then Alliance grabbed the guy's hair, put his head under his armpit, and punched his head again and again. Finally, he withdrew his fist and made a gesture of qi sinking into his dantian. He felt refreshed. Another victory. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.